The frozen train platform fell silent as Eleanor Graves stared down at the man in the wheelchair. Her jaw tightened, disgust flashing across her face like a slap. "I asked for a partner," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "not half a man." Gideon Vale felt the words crack through him worse than any mind collapse ever had. Around them, townspeople stopped mid-stride, watching the woman who'd promised him a future now backing away like he carried some disease. The train whistle screamed behind him, his last chance to run from this humiliation. But Gideon's hands gripped the wheels of his chair and held steady. He wasn't going anywhere. If you want to see how this man transforms an entire town's cruelty into his greatest triumph, stay with me until the very end. And hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The locomotive's brakes shrieked against frozen rails as it pulled into Black Hollow Station, belching black smoke into the gray January sky. Gideon Vale sat rigid in his handcrafted wheelchair near the cargo door, his leather gloves gripping the armrests hard enough to crease the wood. Through the gap in the freight car, he could see the platform, rough timber planks dusted with snow, a handful of people bundled in wool coats, their breath hanging in clouds. This was it, the place he'd been writing to for 3 months. The town where Eleanor Graves had promised him a partnership, a position managing her ranch operations, a chance to rebuild what the mine collapse had taken from him. "You getting off here, mister?" The conductor appeared in the doorway, a wiry man with tobacco-stained teeth. His eyes flicked down to the wheelchair, then away just as fast. "I am." "Well, we ain't got no ramp. You'll have to—" "I built a ramp." Gideon jerked his chin toward the wooden contraption he'd assembled and lashed to the chair's frame. "Just need you to help me lower it." The conductor muttered something under his breath but did as asked. Together, they positioned the ramp against the train car's edge, and Gideon rolled himself down onto the platform. The wheels crunched through ice. Cold bit through his coat immediately. He dressed carefully that morning. Clean shirt, pressed vest, his best coat despite the patches on the elbows. His dark hair was combed back, his jaw freshly shaved. He wanted to look like a man worth trusting, worth respecting. A woman stood near the station house, 30 yards away. Tall, straight-backed, wearing a burgundy coat that stood out against all the drab wool and leather. Her blonde hair was pinned up beneath a wide-brimmed hat, and even from a distance Gideon could see the sharp lines of her face. Eleanor Graves. Had to be. She matched the description she'd given in her letters. He rolled himself toward her, navigating around patches of ice and frozen mud. People turned to stare. A man in a wheelchair wasn't something you saw every day out here. Most men who got hurt bad enough to need one didn't survive long. "Mrs. Graves?" Gideon stopped a few feet from her, meeting her eyes. She was older than he'd expected, maybe 45, with lines around her mouth that suggested she smiled rarely. "I'm Gideon Vale. Thank you for, Her expression changed before he could finish. The polite neutrality drained away, replaced by something cold and sharp. She looked him up and down, her gaze lingering on the wheelchair, on his legs beneath the blanket across his lap. "You're the engineer." Her voice was flat. "Yes, ma'am. I have the contracts you sent, and I brought my tools and my survey equipment. I can start reviewing your irrigation systems as early as— I didn't realize you were crippled." The word hit the cold air like a stone through glass. Gideon felt his chest tighten, but he kept his voice level. "My legs don't work. The rest of me does. I can survey land, design water systems, manage construction crews, everything I said in my letters." "You said you were injured in a mining accident. You didn't mention you couldn't walk." It didn't seem relevant to the work. Eleanor's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. Didn't seem relevant. She glanced at the small crowd that had gathered, station workers, a few ranch hands, some townspeople waiting for freight. Then she looked back at Gideon. "Mr. Vale, I need a partner who can ride property lines, work alongside ranch hands, handle physical labor when necessary. I asked for a man who could help me run a working ranch." "I can do all of that?" "No." She said it simply, like stating a fact. "You can't. Look at you." Heat flooded Gideon's face. Around them, the watching crowd had gone quiet. He could feel their stares like brands against his skin. "Mrs. Graves, if you'll just give me a chance to show you what I'm capable of." "I asked for a partner," she said, louder now, her voice carrying across the platform. "Not half a man. The silence that followed felt absolute. Somewhere a horse stamped. The train engine hissed. Gideon couldn't move, couldn't speak. The humiliation was physical, a weight pressing down on his chest until he couldn't breathe properly. Half a man. She'd said it in front of everyone. Half a man. Eleanor turned away. "I'm sorry you wasted the journey, Mr. Vale. The train will be heading back east in an hour. I suggest you get on it." She walked toward a waiting carriage, her boots crunching through the snow with absolute certainty. Her driver, a thick-shouldered man with a gray beard, gave Gideon a single pitying glance before helping her up into the seat. The carriage rolled away. Gideon sat frozen on the platform, the wind cutting through his coat. Around him, people began to move again, to talk in low voices. He caught fragments. Didn't know he was... Waste of space. Shame, really. The conductor appeared at his elbow. "Train leaves in 50 minutes, mister. You want help getting back on?" Gideon stared at the tracks, at the locomotive that would carry him back to nothing, back to his sister's cramped house in Philadelphia, where he'd spent the last 2 years sleeping in a converted pantry, listening to her husband complain about the extra mouth to feed. Back to the pitying looks and the carefully worded suggestions that maybe he'd be happier in a veterans hospital somewhere. He'd left that life with everything he owned in 2 trunks. He told his sister he was going west to start over, to prove he was still worth something. She'd hugged him and whispered, "Please be careful," like he was fragile, like he might break, and now he was supposed to crawl back and admit she'd been right. "No," Gideon said. The conductor frowned. "What's that?" "I said no." Gideon looked up at him. "I'm staying." "Staying? Mister, there ain't nothing here for you. That lady made it pretty clear." "I heard what she said." Gideon's voice came out harder than he intended. "But I didn't come all this way to turn around because one person decided I wasn't worth the trouble." The conductor shook his head and walked away, muttering about fools and frozen corpses. Gideon rolled himself toward the edge of the platform where his 2 trunks had been unloaded. The station master, a pot-bellied man with suspenders and a handlebar mustache, stood nearby. "I need somewhere to stay," Gideon said. "A boarding house or a hotel." The station master scratched his beard. "We got Morrison's boarding house up on 2nd Street. $1 a night, meals extra, but..." He hesitated. "Place has stairs." "Everything has stairs." "Yeah, but Morrison's got a lot of them. No rooms on the ground floor." Gideon felt something snap inside him. Not anger exactly. Something colder, more determined. "Then I'll build a ramp," he said. "Where can I get lumber?" But Morrison's boarding house was a 2-story structure with peeling white paint and a front porch that sagged in the middle. True to the station master's word, 6 wooden steps led up to the front door. Mrs. Morrison herself answered Gideon's knock. A thin woman with gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She looked at him through the screen door, her eyes moving from his face to the wheelchair and back again. "We don't take charity cases," she said. "I'm not asking for charity. I have money. I need a room. Can you make it upstairs?" "No, but I can sleep on your ground floor, storage room, pantry, I don't care." She chewed her lip, considering. $1.50 a night for the pantry, no meals included. You'll have to get food from the diner or cook your own. It was highway robbery, and they both knew it, but Gideon didn't have the energy to argue. Fine. She opened the door just wide enough for him to roll through. The pantry turned out to be barely larger than a closet, with 1 small window and shelves stacked with canned goods. There was just enough floor space for his wheelchair and one of his trunks. "You'll share the washroom with the other boarders," Mrs. Morrison said. "It's through there, but..." She gestured vaguely at the doorway, which had a 4-inch lip. "I'll manage." After she left, Gideon sat in the dim space and let himself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The rejection, the humiliation, the waste of his last savings on a train ticket to nowhere. He'd been so sure. Eleanor's letters had been encouraging, almost warm. She'd called his engineering credentials impressive, said the ranch desperately needed his expertise. He'd let himself imagine a future, a real position, respect, maybe even a home. Half a man. He pressed his palms against his eyes until spots of color swam in the darkness. When he finally lowered his hands, he noticed the room had grown colder. The small window was poorly sealed, frost creeping across the glass. He pulled his coat tighter and tried to figure out what the hell he was going to do next. talk. The next morning, Gideon rolled himself through Black Hollow's main street. The town wasn't much, 24 buildings clustered along a dirt road that turned to frozen mud this time of year. There was a general store, a blacksmith's forge, a diner, a saloon, a doctor's office with a faded sign. Most of the structures looked like they'd been built hastily 20 years ago and hadn't been maintained since. People stared. Some pretended not to, but Gideon had gotten good at recognizing the quick glances, the double takes, the way conversations died when he rolled past. He stopped in front of the general store. More steps. Of course. Need something? A voice came from beside the building. A young man, maybe 20, with red hair and freckles, stood holding a crate of canned goods. He set it down and came closer. "You're the fellow who came in on yesterday's train. The one Mrs. Graves—" He stopped himself. "The one Mrs. Graves rejected in front of the whole town," Gideon finished. "Yeah, that's me." The young man had the decency to look embarrassed. "I'm Tom Bradshaw. I work for the store." "Gideon Vale." He gestured at the steps. "Any chance you can help me get up there? I need supplies." Tom glanced back at the store entrance, then nodded. "We've got a loading door in back, no steps. I can let you in that way." It was a small kindness, but after yesterday, it felt significant. The store's interior was cramped and dusty, shelves packed with everything from flour sacks to shovels. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with thinning hair and a sharp expression that suggested he didn't suffer fools. "This is Mr. Brennan," Tom said. "He owns the store." Brennan looked at Gideon, at the wheelchair, and his expression soured. "We don't give handouts. I'm not asking for handouts. I need food and lamp oil." "You got money?" Gideon pulled out his leather coin purse and dropped it on the counter. It landed with a solid thunk. Brennan's eyebrows rose slightly, but his suspicious look didn't entirely fade. While Tom gathered the supplies, Brennan leaned against the counter and studied Gideon. "You planning to stay in Black Hollow?" "For now." "Mrs. Graves turned you away. That means most ranchers won't touch you. No one wants to hire someone she rejected. Looks like you're not worth much." "That's her opinion." "That's everyone's opinion." Brennan crossed his arms. "You seem like an educated fellow. You should go back east where you came from. Towns like this, they're hard on men who can't pull their weight." "I can pull my weight." Brennan made a dismissive sound. "Maybe where you're from. Not here." Tom returned with the supplies wrapped in brown paper. Gideon paid, counting out the coins carefully, then balanced the packages in his lap and rolled back toward the rear door. As he left, he heard Brennan mutter to Tom, "Give him a week. He'll be gone." By the third day, Gideon understood that Brennan had been right about one thing. Black Hollow was determined to break him. The town wasn't openly cruel. No one threw rocks or spat at him. But the cold shoulder was its own kind of violence. Shop owners served him last, if they served him at all. When he inquired about work at the blacksmith's forge, the smith looked him up and down and said, "Can't use a man who can't stand at an anvil." When he asked at the saloon if they needed help with bookkeeping, the owner laughed outright. The few people who spoke to him did so with exaggerated patience, like talking to a child. "Are you sure you don't need help with that?" they'd ask, watching him navigate a doorway. Or, "Must be hard for you, being all the way out here." What made it worse were the whispers. Gideon heard them everywhere, fragments of conversations that died when he rolled close enough to make out words. Eleanor was right to send him away. Waste of space. Ought to go back where he came from. On the fourth day, he wheeled himself to the edge of town and sat looking out at the scrubland beyond. The wind was bitter, cutting through his coat. His money was running out faster than he'd planned. At this rate, he'd be broke in 3 weeks. He could still leave. Swallow his pride, board the next eastbound train, admit defeat. The thought made him sick. A sound interrupted his thoughts. Wheels creaking, the jingle of harnesses. He turned to see a wagon approaching, pulled by a tired-looking mule. The driver was a woman, though it took him a moment to realize it. She wore men's work clothes, canvas pants, a patched coat, boots caked with mud. Her dark hair was tied back with a strip of cloth, and her face was weathered in a way that made her age impossible to guess. Could have been 30, could have been 45. The wagon was loaded with what looked like bundles of laundry, sheets, shirts, work clothes. She pulled the mule to a stop when she saw him, studying him with eyes that were neither friendly nor hostile, just assessing. "You're the one who came to work for Eleanor Graves," she said. It wasn't a question. "I was supposed to." "She turned you away." "She did." The woman nodded slowly. "Heard about that. Heard she called you half a man in front of the whole station." Gideon felt his jaw tighten. Word travels fast. In a town this size, word travels before it even happens. She shifted on the wagon seat. "I'm Clara Whitmore. I run a laundry business out past the north end of town. Gideon Vale." "I know." She tilted her head, still studying him. "What are you doing out here?" "Thinking." "About leaving?" He didn't answer right away. Then, "Maybe." Clara was quiet for a moment, then she surprised him. "You any good with repairs? Mechanical things?" "I was a mining engineer. I worked with equipment, ventilation systems, pulley mechanisms." "Why?" "Because my laundry wringer broke 2 days ago, and the only person in town who could fix it wants $20 I don't have." She paused. "If you can fix it, I'll pay you $5 and give you a hot meal." It was the first offer of real work anyone had made. Gideon felt something shift in his chest. Not quite hope, but close to it. "I can look at it," he said. "No promises." "Fair enough," Clara gestured to the wagon. "Can you get up here?" It took some maneuvering. Clara had to help pull while Gideon used his upper body strength to haul himself onto the wagon seat. His wheelchair went in the back, tied down among the laundry bundles. They rode in silence for a while. The wagon creaked. The mule plodded forward with patient resignation. "Why'd you offer me work?" Gideon asked finally. "Everyone else in this town acts like I'm invisible." Clara kept her eyes on the road. "Because I know what it's like when people decide you're not worth their time." Her voice was flat, matter of fact. "And because I need my ringer fixed and I'm fresh out of better options." It was the most honest answer anyone had given him. Ditag. Clara's property was a ramshackle collection of buildings at the edge of town. A small house with a sagging roof, a larger structure that served as the laundry works, and a barn that looked ready to collapse. Everything was held together with makeshift repairs and what appeared to be sheer stubbornness. She helped Gideon down from the wagon and into his wheelchair, then led him into the laundry building. The interior was hot and damp, filled with the smell of lye soap and wet fabric. Large copper tubs lined one wall, and in the center stood the broken wringer, a hand-cranked contraption with 2 rubber rollers designed to squeeze water from wet clothes. Gideon rolled closer and examined it. One of the rollers had come loose from its mounting bracket, and the crank mechanism was jammed with what looked like a torn piece of fabric. "Can you fix it?" Clara stood with her arms crossed, her expression guarded. "Yeah, I need some tools, though. Wrench, screwdriver, maybe some oil." She brought him a toolbox that looked like it had been salvaged from a dozen different sources. Mismatched tools, some rusted, some surprisingly well-maintained. Gideon set to work. It took him an hour. He had to disassemble the crank mechanism, clear the jammed fabric, realign the mounting bracket, and tighten everything back into place. His hands cramped from the cold and the unfamiliar angle, but he kept at it. When he finally turned the crank, it moved smoothly, the rollers turning in perfect alignment. Clara tested it herself, feeding a wet sheet through. Water streamed out, and the fabric came out the other side wrung dry. She nodded once, satisfied. "You did good work." It wasn't complicated. Still, she wiped her hands on her apron. "Most men would have told me it couldn't be fixed, that I needed to buy a new one, just so they could charge me more." She pulled $5 silver from her pocket and handed them to him. "Here, and I'll make you that meal." They ate in her kitchen, a simple stew with potatoes and carrots, bread that was dense but filling. Clara didn't talk much, and Gideon found he didn't mind. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was just quiet. "Why do people in this town hate outsiders so much?" he asked eventually. Clara chewed thoughtfully. "They don't hate outsiders. They hate anything that makes them uncomfortable. And you make them real uncomfortable." "Because I'm in a wheelchair." "Because you're in a wheelchair and you're not ashamed of it. They don't know what to do with that." She took a drink of water. "Folks here, they survive by keeping their heads down and not making waves. You show up, different and proud, and it scares them, makes them think they might have to change how they see things." So they'd rather I just leave. They'd rather you disappear, yeah. Clara met his eyes. But you're not going to, are you? Gideon thought about it. About the humiliation at the train station. About Brennan's dismissal. About the whispers that followed him everywhere. Then he thought about the ringer he'd just fixed. About Clara's straightforward offer of work. About the $5 silver in his pocket. The first money he'd earned through his own skill in 2 years. No, he said. I'm not going anywhere. Clara nodded slowly. Good. Because I've got about a dozen other things that need fixing around here. Over the next 2 weeks, Gideon fell into a rhythm. He spent his mornings at Clara's property, repairing equipment and improving her systems. He fixed a leaky trough, rebuilt a broken pulley for hauling water, and designed a simple cart that let her transport heavier loads without straining her back. She paid him fairly, never asked questions about his past, and fed him 1 meal a day. It wasn't much, but it was enough. In the afternoons, he returned to town and forced himself to be visible. He'd roll down the main street, stop at the general store for supplies, park himself outside the blacksmith's forge, and watch the smith work. At first, people avoided him, but gradually they started to acknowledge his presence. A nod here, a brief greeting there. Tom Bradshaw from the general store began seeking him out, asking questions about the East, about mining, about anything that wasn't Black Hollow's endless sameness. Gideon found the young man's enthusiasm exhausting, but oddly touching. You ever think about leaving this place? Gideon asked him one afternoon. Tom was stacking crates outside the store, while Gideon waited for his supplies. All the time, Tom admitted. But my folks need me here. My pa died 3 years back, and Ma can't run the farm alone, so... He shrugged. I stay. That's decent of you. It's just what you do. Tom set down the crate he was holding. Can I ask you something? Does it bother you? How people stare? Every damn day. But you keep coming back to town anyway. What else am I going to do? Hide? Gideon shook his head. I spent 2 years hiding after the accident. Told myself I was recovering, but really I was just waiting to stop being angry at the world. That didn't work. So now I'm trying something else. What's that? Not giving them the satisfaction of seeing me quit. Tom grinned. I like that. But not everyone was warming to Gideon's presence. Harlan Pike, the town's most successful merchant and the owner of the largest trading post in the territory, made his displeasure clear the first time they crossed paths. Pike was a man in his 40s, well-dressed by Black Hollow standards, with carefully groomed dark hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. He owned the lumberyard, held mortgages on half the properties in town, and had a reputation for driving hard bargains. Gideon first encountered him outside the trading post where Pike was supervising a delivery. You're Vale, Pike said, looking down at Gideon. The cripple who's been working for Clara Whitmore. I'm Vale, Gideon confirmed, ignoring the slur. And yes, I work for Clara sometimes. Interesting. Pike's smile was thin. I didn't realize Clara could afford to hire help. She's usually begging for extensions on her supply credit. Maybe she's doing better than you think. Maybe. Pike's eyes narrowed slightly. Or maybe you're working cheap because no one else will hire you. Word of advice, Vale. Clara Whitmore's barely holding on out there. When her business finally folds, and it will, you'll be out of work again. Better to cut your losses now and move on. I'll take my chances. Pike's expression hardened. Suit yourself. Just don't expect any help from me when things go south. He walked away without another word. That evening, Clara told Gideon more about Harlan Pike over dinner. He's been trying to buy my property for 2 years, she said, stirring a pot of beans on her stove. Wants to expand his lumber operation. I keep telling him no, so he makes things difficult. Delays my supply orders, spreads rumors about my business, charges me higher interest on credit than anyone else. Why doesn't anyone stop him? Clara gave him a look. Because he owns half the town, and the other half owes him money. That's how it works here. You cross Harlan Pike, you end up broke or worse. Has anyone tried? Few people. They either left town or learned to keep quiet. She ladled beans into 2 bowls. You should be careful around him. He doesn't like people who don't need him. I don't need him? Exactly. That makes you dangerous. Gideon thought about that while they ate. He'd assumed his biggest obstacle in Black Hollow was overcoming prejudice about his disability. He was starting to realize the real problem was power. Who had it? Who didn't? And what happened to people who threatened the balance? Mick. The turning point came 3 weeks after Gideon arrived. Clara's property had no proper ramp to her front porch, just some loose boards propped against the steps. Every time Gideon visited, he had to navigate the precarious setup, and every time he worried the boards would slip and send him crashing. Finally, he decided to fix it properly. He bought lumber from Pike's yard, paid cash, met Pike's smug expression with silence, and spent 2 days building a real ramp with proper support beams and a gentle slope. He made it wide enough for his wheelchair and sturdy enough to last years. When Clara saw it, she stood on the porch and stared without speaking for a long moment. "You didn't have to do this," she said finally. "It needed doing." "Still." She came down the ramp slowly, running her hand along the rail he'd installed. "This is... thank you." It was such a small thing, a simple ramp, but the look on Clara's face suggested it meant more than that. That night, as Gideon wheeled himself back toward town, he passed the blacksmith's forge. The smith, a burly man named Garrett, was locking up for the evening. He paused when he saw Gideon. "Heard you built a ramp for Clara." "I did." Garrett nodded slowly. "My loading dock's got a broken support beam. Been meaning to fix it, but..." He gestured vaguely at his forge, at the work waiting inside. "I'm swamped. If you've got time tomorrow, I'll pay you $3 to shore it up." It was the first time anyone besides Clara had offered him work. "I'll be there," Gideon said. Word spread. Within a week, Gideon had repaired a grain chute at the mill, fixed a broken wagon axle for a rancher passing through town, and redesigned the pulley system at the general store to make loading freight easier. People still stared. They still whispered. But now some of those whispers were different. "Did you see what he did with Garrett's dock? Heard he fixed Morrison's water pump in under an hour. Shame about his legs, but he's got a good head on his shoulders." It wasn't respect, not yet. But it was acknowledgement. It was the beginning of something. And Harlan Pike noticed. Times. Gideon was working at Clara's property when Pike showed up unannounced. Clara was inside sorting laundry, and Gideon was outside adjusting the pulley system on her water well. He'd designed a simple mechanical advantage that let her raise full buckets with half the effort. "Impressive work," Pike said, approaching from the road. Gideon looked up. Pike stood with his hands in his pockets, his expression pleasant, but his eyes cold. "Thanks. You've been busy lately, doing repairs all over town." Pike walked closer. "I have to admit I underestimated you. You're quite skilled." "What do you want, Pike?" "Direct." "I like that." Pike smiled. "I want to make you an offer. Come work for me. I'll pay you $20 a week, more than you're making now running around doing odd jobs. You'd oversee maintenance and repairs for all my properties. It's steady work, Vale. More than a man in your position could hope for." Gideon set down his wrench. "And what would I have to do?" "Your job. Keep things running smoothly." "That's it?" "That's it." Pike's smile didn't waver. "Well, I'd expect loyalty, of course. You'd work for me exclusively. No more side jobs, no more helping out people like Clara Whitmore, who can barely pay you in warm meals." There it was. Pike didn't want Gideon's skills. He wanted Gideon unavailable to the people Pike couldn't control. "I'll pass," Gideon said. Pike's smile thinned. "That's a mistake." "Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. You're choosing poverty over stability. Do you know what happens to men like you when winter really sets in? When the work dries up and the cold gets serious?" Pike leaned closer. "They don't last, Vale. They freeze or starve or finally accept that they should have left when they had the chance." "I'll manage. Will you?" Pike straightened. "Think about it. Really think. Because this is the only offer you're going to get." He walked away without waiting for a response. When Clara came outside and asked what Pike wanted, Gideon told her. She didn't look surprised, just tired. "He's going to make things harder for you now," she said. "That's what he does when people don't play along." Let him try. But Clara was right. Over the next few days, Gideon noticed small changes. His usual table at the diner was suddenly always occupied. The blacksmith stopped meeting his eyes. Tom Bradshaw seemed nervous whenever they spoke, glancing around like he was worried about being seen. Someone spread a rumor that Gideon was charging unfair prices for repairs, that he'd swindled a widow out of $5. It wasn't true, but truth didn't matter. Enough people believed it that work slowed to a trickle. Gideon's money was running out again. He couldn't afford Morrison's boarding house much longer, and he had no idea where else he'd go. One cold evening, sitting in his cramped pantry room, he counted his remaining coins. $7.30. Maybe 2 weeks if he was careful. He thought about Pike's offer. $20 a week. Steady work. All he had to do was abandon the one person in this town who treated him like a human being. He put the coins back in his pocket and made himself a promise. He'd starve before he'd work for Harlan Pike. Jowies. The next morning, Clara found him building something outside her property. A wooden frame with an angled board mounted on supports. "What's that?" she asked. "Inclined plane for loading heavy items onto wagons without breaking your back." "I didn't ask you to build that." "I know, but I had time, and you need it." Clara stood watching him work. Finally, she said, "You're running out of money, aren't you?" Gideon's hand stilled on the wood. "I'm managing." That's not an answer. He set down his hammer and looked at her. "I've got enough for maybe 2 more weeks. After that," he shrugged. "I'll figure something out." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's a room above the laundry building. It's not much, just a loft space really, but it's warm and dry. You could stay there in exchange for helping with repairs and maintenance. I can't pay you much in cash, but I can feed you and give you a place to sleep." Gideon stared at her. "Clara, but—" "Before you say anything, understand this isn't charity. I need the help and you need a place to stay. It's practical. People will talk. People already talk about both of us." She crossed her arms. "At least this way we'll give them something real to gossip about instead of just making things up." Gideon felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. "Okay," he said. "Thank you." Clara nodded once, brisk and businesslike. But as she turned to go back inside, Gideon caught the smallest hint of a smile. That afternoon, he moved his belongings from Morrison's boarding house to Clara's property. The loft space was exactly what she'd described. Rough wooden walls, a single window, barely enough room for his chair and his trunk. It was the best place he'd lived in 2 years. That night, lying in the dark and listening to the wind howl outside, Gideon realized something had shifted. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was building something. Not a grand future, not the partnership Eleanor Graves had promised, just something small and real and his. It was enough. For now, it was enough. The loft above Clara's laundry became Gideon's workshop as much as his living space. He'd rigged a pulley system to haul himself and his wheelchair up through the trapdoor, another of his improvised solutions that made Clara shake her head in what might have been admiration or exasperation. He could never quite tell. Winter deepened. Snow fell in heavy blankets that turned Black Hollow's streets into rutted ice. Most people hunkered down, venturing out only when necessary. But Gideon found himself busier than ever. The cold made everything break, frozen pumps, cracked wheels, hinges that seized up overnight. And slowly, reluctantly, people started coming to him. Not everyone. Harlan Pike's influence still hung over the town like smoke. But enough people needed repairs badly enough that they were willing to overlook their discomfort with the man in the wheelchair. Clara's business grew too. With Gideon's improvements to her equipment and workspace, she could handle twice the laundry in half the time. She started taking contracts from the mining camps 20 miles north, rough men who'd pay premium prices for clean clothes and didn't care who washed them. They fell into an easy partnership. Clara would wake before dawn to start the fires and sort the incoming loads. Gideon would work on repairs and maintenance, fixing whatever had broken the day before. They'd eat lunch together in her kitchen, usually in companionable silence. Evenings, Gideon would retreat to his loft and work on his own projects, designing better tools, sketching improvements for the town's water systems, writing letters to engineering journals back east that never wrote back. It wasn't the life he'd imagined when he left Philadelphia, but it was his, and that counted for something. One afternoon in late February, Tom Bradshaw appeared at Clara's property, looking agitated. His face was red from cold and something else, anger, maybe, or fear. "Mr. Vale," he said, breathless, "I need your help." Gideon was outside reinforcing the supports on Clara's wagon. He set down his hammer. "What's wrong?" "It's Mr. Brennan. He's trying to fire me." Tom's words came out in a rush. "He says I've been wasting time talking to you instead of working. Says if I don't stop associating with you, he'll let me go." "He can't fire you for talking to people." "He can do whatever he wants. He owns the store." Tom looked miserable. "My ma needs my wages. If I lose this job, we'll lose the farm." Clara had emerged from the laundry building, wiping her hands on her apron. "This is Pike's doing," she said flatly. "He's putting pressure on Brennan to squeeze you out." "Why?" Tom asked. "I haven't done anything to him." "You're friendly with me," Gideon said, understanding. "Pike wants me isolated. If people see you getting punished for helping me, they'll think twice about doing the same." Tom's shoulders sagged. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vale. I don't want to stop talking to you, but I can't lose this job." "I know. It's okay." "It's not okay," Clara said sharply. "Pike's a bully, and Brennan's a coward for going along with it." "What am I supposed to do?" Tom's voice cracked. "Go against them both?" "I can't." Gideon met the young man's eyes. "You do what you have to do to take care of your family. I understand that." After Tom left, Clara turned to Gideon with frustration written across her face. "You can't just let Pike run you out of town." "I'm not leaving." "Then what are you going to do? He's turning people against you one by one." "I'm going to keep working." Gideon picked up his hammer again. "And hope that eventually results speak louder than threats." But over the next week, the pressure increased. The blacksmith stopped answering when Gideon called out greetings. The mill owner claimed he'd found someone else to fix his grain chute, even though Gideon could see it was still broken. Even Mrs. Morrison at the boarding house avoided his eyes when they passed on the street. The only person who seemed immune to Pike's influence was old Doc Lindsay, the town physician. He'd ignored Gideon completely until one evening when his office sign came loose in a windstorm and nearly brained a passing rancher. "Heard you're handy with repairs," Doc Lindsay said when Gideon rolled past the next morning. The doctor was a grizzled man in his 60s with permanently stained fingers and a skeptical expression. "Can you fix that sign so it doesn't kill anybody?" "Probably." "Good. I'll pay you $2. Gideon examined the sign's mounting. The wood frame had rotted through, and the whole thing was held up by rust and prayer. "This needs to be rebuilt from scratch. $3 and I'll make it last another 10 years. Doc Lindsay grunted. "Deal." While Gideon worked, the doctor sat on his porch smoking a pipe and watching. After a while, he said, "You're making Pike nervous." "I'm fixing a sign." "You're showing people they don't need to be afraid." Doc Lindsay puffed smoke. "That's dangerous in a town where one man controls everything." "I'm not trying to control anything." "Doesn't matter what you're trying to do. Matters what you're actually doing." The doctor studied him. "You know why Eleanor Graves really turned you away?" Gideon's hand stilled on the wood. "Because she didn't want a cripple for a partner." "Wrong." "Well, partly wrong." Doc Lindsay leaned back. "Eleanor's business has been failing for 3 years. Her husband died, her ranch manager robbed her blind, and she's drowning in debt to Pike. She needed someone desperate enough to work cheap and too broken down to ask questions. When she saw you in that chair, she realized you weren't broken at all. You were just inconvenienced. That scared her." "Why would that scare her?" "Because strong people make weak people uncomfortable. They reflect back all the cowardice and compromise." The doctor knocked ash from his pipe. "Eleanor wanted a victim she could control. She got a survivor instead. So she threw you away before you could figure out how pathetic her situation really was." Gideon thought about that while he finished the sign. When he was done, Doc Lindsay paid him and added an extra $1. "What's this for?" "Because you did good work, and I appreciate it. Try not to let Pike run you off, son. Town could use more people with spines." That night, Gideon told Clara what Doc Lindsay had said. She was mending a torn sheet by lamplight, her needle moving in quick, efficient strokes. "Doc's right about Eleanor. Everyone knows she's nearly bankrupt. Pike's been circling her ranch like a vulture, waiting for her to fold so he can buy it cheap. And yet people still treat her like royalty. She owns land. That makes her important no matter how broke she is." Clara bit off a thread. "That's how it works here. Land means power, money means control, and the rest of us just try to survive in between." "You ever think about leaving?" Clara's hands paused. "Every day." "Why don't you?" Where would I go? I've got no family, no education, no skills except washing other people's dirt. She resumed sewing. At least here I have a business. It's not much, but it's mine. You could start over somewhere else. So could you. They looked at each other across the small kitchen. Outside, wind rattled the windows. I'm tired of running, Gideon said finally. Yeah, Clara said. Me too. The next morning brought trouble in a form Gideon hadn't anticipated. He was working in the loft when he heard raised voices outside. He maneuvered to the window and looked down to see Clara standing in her yard, facing two men he didn't recognize. They wore heavy coats and hard expressions. He rigged the pulley and lowered himself down as quickly as he could manage. 3 weeks overdue, one of the men was saying. He was tall and thick-shouldered, with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Mr. Pike's been patient, but patience has limits. I paid last month's bill, Clara said. Her voice was steady, but Gideon could see her hands clenched at her sides. I don't owe him anything. Your records say different. The man pulled out a ledger. Says here you owe $47 for soap supplies, lye, and fabric. Due 2 weeks ago. That's not possible. I keep my own records. Then your records are wrong. The second man spoke now, shorter but meaner looking. We're here to collect. You can pay now, or we can start taking goods as collateral. Gideon rolled up behind Clara. Both men looked at him, their expressions shifting to something between surprise and disdain. There a problem? Gideon asked. No problem, Scarface said. Just collecting a debt. Clara doesn't owe Pike anything. And you are? Someone who keeps better records than Pike apparently does. The mean-looking one stepped forward. You want to be careful, cripple. This doesn't concern you. It concerns me if you're trying to rob her. Rob? Scarface pulled out the ledger again. It's right here in writing. Mrs. Whitmore ordered supplies on credit. The bill's due. If she can't pay, that's her problem. Let me see that. Clara reached for the ledger, but Scarface pulled it back. You'll see it when Mr. Pike's lawyer presents it to the sheriff. In the meantime, we're authorized to secure collateral. He looked around the property. That wagon ought to cover part of it. You're not taking my wagon. Try and stop us. The mean one started toward the wagon. Clara moved to block him, and he shoved her aside, not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to make his point. Gideon didn't think. He just moved. He grabbed the man's coat and yanked hard, using his chair's weight as leverage. The man stumbled backward, surprised. Scarface stepped forward, his hand moving toward his belt, where something metal glinted. Touch either of us again, Gideon said, his voice cold. And I'll make sure everyone in this town knows Pike sent armed thugs to rob a woman who doesn't owe him a cent. Armed? Scarface's hand stilled. We're not armed. That knife on your belt says different. The two men exchanged glances. Around them, a small crowd had started to gather. A few of Clara's neighbors, some people from nearby properties. Witnesses. Scarface put the ledger away. You'll be hearing from Mr. Pike's lawyer. Looking forward to it. They left, but their eyes promised this wasn't over. When they were gone, Clara turned to Gideon. That was stupid. They could have hurt you. They were going to take your wagon. It's just a wagon. No, Gideon said. It's your livelihood. There's a difference. Clara's jaw tightened. She didn't thank him, didn't acknowledge what he'd done. She just went back inside, her shoulders rigid. Gideon sat in the cold yard, feeling the adrenaline drain away, leaving him shaky. He'd been in fights before the accident. Mine work bred tough men who settled disputes with fists, but that was when he could stand, when he could move freely. Now he'd just confronted two armed men while sitting in a chair. The stupidity of it hit him belatedly. That evening, Clara made dinner in silence. They ate without speaking until finally she said, Pike's going to come after you now. You know that. Let him. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then tell me. Clara set down her fork. 5 years ago, there was a man named Jacob Ross. He owned a freight business, did good work, treated people fairly. Pike wanted to buy him out, but Jacob refused. So Pike started spreading rumors that Jacob was skimming from his clients, hired some men to plant stolen goods in Jacob's warehouse. By the time Jacob proved he was innocent, half his customers had already left and his reputation was destroyed. He sold to Pike for pennies on the dollar and left town. What happened to him? I don't know. Nobody does. Clara looked at Gideon. That's what Pike does. He destroys people systematically, And now you've made yourself a target. I made myself a target the day I arrived and didn't leave when Eleanor Graves told me to. This is different. Before, you were just an annoyance. Now you've challenged him directly. Gideon pushed his plate away. What did you want me to do? Let them take your wagon? I want you to survive. Claire's voice rose slightly, the first real emotion he'd heard from her in weeks. I want you to not throw your life away because of some misplaced sense of honor. It's not misplaced. Yes, it is. You don't owe me anything. We barely know each other. I know you gave me work when nobody else would. I know you offered me a place to stay when I had nowhere to go. That's enough. Clara opened her mouth, closed it. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She just stood up and started clearing the dishes. You're a fool, Gideon Vale, she said quietly. Probably. The next day, Gideon went into town and straight to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Dawes was a tired-looking man in his 50s who gave the impression of someone who'd stopped caring about justice years ago and now just went through the motions. I need to report an attempted theft, Gideon said. Dawes looked up from his desk. Theft of what? Gideon explained about Pike's men, the false ledger, the threats. Dawes listened with the expression of someone hearing a story they'd heard 100 times before. Do you have proof Pike's ledger is false? Dawes asked when Gideon finished. Clara has her own record showing she paid, so it's her word against Pike's bookkeeping, and Pike's lawyers will say she's mistaken or lying. Dawes leaned back in his chair. Look, Mr. Vale, I understand you're trying to help your friend, but unless you have hard evidence of wrongdoing, there's nothing I can do. His men threatened us. They were armed. Were they? Or did they just have tools on their belts like every working man in this territory? Dawes rubbed his face. I'll make a note of your complaint. If there's another incident, come back and we'll see what can be done. Until then, I suggest you and Mrs. Whitmore settle this debt dispute through proper legal channels. There is no debt. Then a judge will sort it out. Dawes picked up his pen, dismissing him. Good day, Mr. Vale. Outside the sheriff's office, Gideon sat in the cold and tried to figure out his next move. He had no legal training, no connections, no leverage. Pike owned the town's officials, controlled its economy, and had enough money to bury Clara in legal fees even if she could prove the debt was fabricated. But Gideon had something Pike didn't. He had nothing left to lose. He spent the rest of that day and the next talking to Clara's other creditors, the feed store, the general supply warehouse, the cooper who made her wash tubs. He asked to see their records, compared dates and amounts, looked for patterns. What he found made his blood run cold. Pike had been systematically falsifying Clara's debts for months. A delivery Clara never received. An order she never placed. Supplies charged to her account when her own records showed she'd paid cash. The amounts were small enough that Clara hadn't caught them immediately, but they added up. If Pike's books were accurate, Clara owed nearly $200 across various businesses, all owned or controlled by Pike. It was fraud. Calculated, deliberate fraud, designed to drive her into bankruptcy so Pike could seize her property. Gideon showed Clara the evidence that evening. She looked through the papers he'd compiled, her face going pale. $200, she whispered. I don't have $200. You don't owe $200. It's all fake. Can you prove that? Your records prove it. My handwritten records against Pike's professionally maintained ledgers? Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. No judge will believe me. Then we make it impossible for them not to believe you. How? Gideon didn't have an answer yet, but he was working on one. Over the next week, he dug deeper. He talked to other people Pike had victimized, quietly, carefully, away from prying eyes. A widow who'd lost her shop, a rancher who'd sold his land for a fraction of its worth, a freight hauler who'd been run out of business on trumped-up charges. The pattern was always the same. Pike would identify someone vulnerable, someone with property or a business he wanted. He'd use false debts, legal harassment, and intimidation to break them down. Then he'd swoop in with a buyout offer that looked like salvation but was really surrender. And no one ever fought back because fighting meant losing everything. But Gideon wasn't from Black Hollow. He didn't understand how things were supposed to work here. He only understood that what Pike was doing was wrong, and wrong things needed to be challenged. He started writing. Not letters to engineering journals this time, but a detailed accounting of Pike's fraudulent practices. Names, dates, amounts. Testimony from victims who agreed to speak anonymously. Evidence of falsified records. He wrote it all out in clear, methodical prose that would have made his old mining supervisors proud. Then he made copies. Not professional copies. He wrote each one out by hand, his cramped fingers aching by lamplight. He made 6 copies total. "What are you planning?" Clara asked one night, watching him work. "I'm planning to make Pike's fraud public." "How?" "I'm going to post these all over town. The general store, the saloon, the train station, everywhere people gather." Clara stared at him. "That's insane. Pike will destroy you." "He's already trying to destroy me. And you. And everyone else who gets in his way." Gideon set down his pen. "Someone has to stand up to him." "Why does it have to be you?" "Because I'm the only one stupid enough to try." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "If you do this, I'm doing it with you." "Clara, you're not doing this alone. If we're going down together." Gideon looked at her across the table. Her face was set with determination, but he could see the fear underneath. She was terrified. So was he. "Okay," he said, "together." They posted the notices at dawn, before most of the town was awake. Clara drove the wagon while Gideon nailed papers to every available surface. By the time the sun was fully up, Black Hollow was papered with evidence of Harlan Pike's corruption. The reaction was immediate. Some people ripped the notices down as soon as they saw them. Others stood reading in silence, their faces troubled. By mid-morning, a crowd had gathered outside Pike's trading post, and Pike himself emerged looking like murder. "Who did this?" His voice carried across the street. No one answered. "I said, who posted these lies about me?" Gideon rolled forward. His heart was hammering, but he kept his voice steady. "I did." Pike's eyes locked onto him. "You." "Me. And everything in those notices is true. You've been falsifying debts and destroying businesses for years." "That's slander." "It's fact. I have proof." "You have nothing but the delusions of people too incompetent to pay their bills." Pike looked around at the gathered crowd. "Listen to me, all of you. This man is a liar and a troublemaker. He's trying to turn you against me because he's bitter about his own failures. Don't believe a word he says." "Then explain the discrepancies," Gideon said. "Explain why Clara Whitmore's personal records don't match your ledgers. She's lying. Then explain why the widow Parsons paid you cash for a delivery she never received. Why Rancher Hobbs was charged for lumber that was never delivered. Why—" "Enough." Pike's face had gone red. "You want to accuse me of something? Do it in court. Otherwise, shut your mouth." "Gladly. Let's go to court. Let's have a judge examine your books and compare them to your victim's records." Pike stepped closer. When he spoke, his voice was low and venomous. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life, cripple." "Maybe. But at least now everyone knows what you really are." Pike turned and went back inside his trading post, slamming the door behind him. The crowd stood in uncertain silence. Then, slowly, people began to disperse. Some looked troubled. Some looked angry. None of them looked at Gideon. Clara rolled up beside him. "Well," she said quietly, "we did it." "Yeah. Now what?" "Now we wait and see if anyone believes us." They didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, 3 of Pike's men came to Clara's property. Not the same men from before. These were harder looking, mean in a way that suggested violence was a tool they used regularly. "Mr. Pike wants to see you," their leader said. He was a stocky man with a broken nose and dead eyes. "Both of you." "Tell Pike if he wants to talk, he knows where to find us," Gideon said. "Wasn't a request." "Still no." The man's hand moved toward his belt. Clara's hand moved toward the rifle she'd been carrying ever since the first confrontation. "You pull that gun, you better be ready to use it," the man said. "Don't worry," Clara said. "I am." For a moment, nobody moved. Then the man smiled, a cold, unpleasant expression. "Suit yourselves. But you're going to wish you'd come peaceful." They left, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. That night, Gideon and Clara took turns keeping watch. They didn't talk about what might be coming, but they both knew. Pike wasn't going to let this stand. He was going to retaliate, and when he did, it would be brutal. Gideon tried to feel afraid, tried to regret what he'd done, but all he felt was a strange, cold clarity. For 2 years, he'd been running from his own helplessness, terrified of being seen as weak or broken. Now he'd done something that might get him killed, and he felt more alive than he had since the mine collapse. Around midnight, Claire spoke from her position by the window. "You asleep?" "No. I never thanked you for standing up for me." "You don't need to thank me." "Yeah, I do." She was quiet for a moment. "Nobody's ever done that before. Risked something real for me. You gave me a place to stay when I had nothing. Seemed only fair." "It's more than fair, it's—" She trailed off. "I don't know what it is, but thank you." Gideon didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The night stretched on, cold and dark, and full of waiting. And in town, Harland Pike sat in his office and planned his revenge. The attack came 3 days later, but not in the way Gideon expected. He woke to Clara pounding on the loft door, her voice sharp with panic. "Gideon, get down here now!" He hauled himself into the wheelchair and used the pulley system, his hands clumsy with sleep and alarm. When he reached the ground, Clara was standing in the doorway of the laundry building, staring at something inside. The interior was destroyed. Soap barrels had been overturned, their contents spilling across the floor in white caustic rivers. The washtubs were dented and cracked. The wringer he'd repaired so carefully had been smashed with something heavy, an axe maybe, or a sledgehammer. Fabric lay scattered everywhere, torn and ruined. The copper boiler had a hole punched through its side. Clara stood frozen, her face blank with shock. When did this happen? Gideon rolled inside, navigating around the wreckage. "I don't know. Sometime after midnight. I fell asleep around 2. Her voice was hollow. "I didn't hear anything." Gideon looked at the damage with a sinking feeling in his gut. This wasn't random vandalism. This was systematic destruction designed to cripple Clara's business completely. The equipment alone would cost hundreds of dollars to replace. The lost soap and fabric added more. And the contract she'd miss while rebuilding would cost her customers she couldn't afford to lose. Pike had made his move, and it was devastating. "We need to tell the sheriff," Gideon said. Clara laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "And say what? Someone broke in and destroyed my business? Dawes will write it down and do nothing, just like always." "We have to try." But Clara was right. When they went to the sheriff's office an hour later, Dawes took notes with the enthusiasm of a man filling out paperwork he knew would never matter. "Any witnesses?" he asked. "No," Clara said. "We were both asleep." "Any idea who might have done this?" "Pike's men. Who else would— Do you have proof it was Pike's men?" Claire's jaw tightened. Who else would have reason to destroy my business right after Gideon posted those notices? Could have been anyone upset by those accusations. Could have been vandals. Could have been someone with a grudge. Dawes set down his pen. "Without witnesses or evidence, I can't arrest anyone." "You won't arrest anyone," Gideon said. "There's a difference." Dawes' expression hardened. "I enforce the law, Mr. Vale. I can't arrest people based on your suspicions." "Even when those suspicions are obviously correct?" "Especially then." Dawes stood up. "I'll keep this report on file. If you find actual evidence, bring it to me. Until then, there's nothing more I can do." Outside, Clara stood in the street and stared at nothing. Gideon rolled up beside her. "I'm finished," she said quietly. "Even if I had the money to replace everything, which I don't, I can't rebuild fast enough to save my contracts. The mining camps will find someone else. My regular customers will move on." She looked at him, and her eyes were empty. "Pike won. He always wins." "No." "Yes. This is what happens when you go against him. He doesn't just beat you, he destroys you completely." She started walking back toward the wagon. "I should have known better." "Clara, you should leave, Gideon. Get out of Black Hollow before Pike decides you need destroying too." She climbed onto the wagon and drove off before he could respond. Gideon sat in the street feeling rage build in his chest like steam pressure. Pike had done this. Everyone knew Pike had done this. And no one was going to stop him because no one ever stopped him. He rolled back to Clara's property. She'd gone inside her house and shut the door. He could hear crying through the walls, harsh, painful sounds that made his chest ache. He went into the destroyed laundry building and looked at the wreckage again. At the smashed equipment and ruined supplies, at years of Clara's hard work reduced to junk in a single night. Then he started cleaning. It took him hours. He couldn't lift the heavy tubs or barrels, but he could sort through the debris, separate what might be salvaged from what was total loss, sweep up the spilled soap and broken glass. His arms burned, his back screamed, but he kept working. Eventually, Clara emerged. She stood in the doorway watching him, her face blotchy from crying. "What are you doing?" "Cleaning up." "Why? There's no point." "There's always a point." Gideon didn't stop working. "Pike wants you to give up, so don't." "You don't understand. I don't have money to replace this equipment. I can barely afford food." "Then we'll rebuild it." "With what?" "With whatever we can scrounge." He finally stopped and looked at her. "I'm a mining engineer, Clara. I know how to improvise equipment from scrap. It won't be pretty, but it'll work. And the supplies? The soap? The fabric? We'll figure it out. One problem at a time." Clara shook her head. "You're insane." "Probably, but I'm not wrong." She stood there for a long moment, exhaustion and despair written across her face. Then, slowly, she picked up a broom and started sweeping. They worked until dark, sorting the wreckage into piles. Salvageable metal here, broken wood there, ruined fabric in a heap for burning. By the time they finished, Gideon's hands were cut and bleeding, and Clara looked ready to collapse. They ate a silent dinner of bread and cold beans. Neither of them had the energy to cook anything more substantial. "Thank you," Clara said finally, "for not leaving." "Where would I go?" "Anywhere. Away from this mess." "This is my mess too now." Clara looked at him across the table. "Why are you doing this, really? You could have walked away a dozen times. Should have walked away." Gideon thought about how to answer that. About the mine collapse that had taken his legs and his future. About the 2 years he'd spent hiding in his sister's house, ashamed of his own existence. About Eleanor Graves calling him half a man in front of everyone. "Because I'm tired of feeling helpless," he said finally. "For 2 years I let the world tell me I was broken. Let people make me feel like I was less than human. And then I came here and you treated me like I was just a person. Someone who could work and be useful and matter." He met her eyes. "Pike wants to take that away, from both of us. And I'm not letting him." Clara's throat worked. She looked like she might cry again, but she didn't. She just nodded once and went back to eating. That night, lying in his loft listening to the wind, Gideon made a decision. Pike had escalated to violence. That meant playing by the old rules, public accusations and documented evidence, wasn't going to work anymore. If Gideon wanted to stop him, he'd have to find leverage Pike couldn't ignore. He spent the next day asking quiet questions around town. Not about Pike directly, that would get back to him too fast. Instead, Gideon asked about Black Hollow's infrastructure. The water systems, the drainage, the bridges and roads. Who maintained them? Who paid for repairs? What he learned was illuminating. Pike owned or controlled most of the town's essential services. The lumber yard that supplied building materials. The freight company that brought in supplies. Even the town's water system, a series of wells and pipes that Pike's companies had installed 15 years ago and maintained ever since. But infrastructure required maintenance, and maintenance required records. Permits, inspection reports, safety certifications, all of which should be public documents filed with the territorial government. Gideon sent a letter to the territorial capital requesting copies of Black Hollow's infrastructure records. It cost him $2 in fees and postage he couldn't really afford, but he paid it anyway. While he waited for a response, he focused on rebuilding Clara's equipment. He scavenged metal from the town dump, begged scraps from the blacksmith's forge, and traded repair work for supplies. Slowly, piece by piece, he cobbled together replacements for what had been destroyed. The new wash tubs were crude compared to the originals, made from salvaged tin and sealed with pitch instead of proper copper rivets. The wringer was a simplified design built from scrap wood and old leather belts. But they worked. Clara watched him with something like wonder. "Where did you learn to do this?" "Mining camps. When equipment breaks down a mile underground, you can't wait weeks for replacement parts. You improvise or you die." "It's not pretty." "No, but it'll get the job done." They tested the equipment with a small load of wash. Water leaked from 3 different places. The wringer jammed twice. The boiler took forever to heat properly, but it worked. Clara stared at the clean laundry coming out of the wringer and tears ran down her face. "Hey, Gideon said. What's wrong? Nothing. Nothing's wrong. She wiped her eyes roughly. I just didn't think. I thought it was over, that Pike had won. He hasn't won anything. He destroyed my business. He destroyed your equipment. There's a difference. Clara laughed through her tears. You're the most stubborn man I've ever met. I've been called worse. Over the next week, word spread that Clara's laundry was operational again. Some of her old customers came back, cautiously at first, then more confidently when they saw she could still deliver clean wash on time. The mining camps renewed their contracts. New customers appeared, people who'd heard about the attack and wanted to support her out of spite for Pike. It wasn't much, but it was survival. Pike noticed, of course. He sent men to intimidate Clara's customers, but most of them held firm. He tried to cut off her supply lines, but Gideon found alternative sources. A soap maker 2 towns over, a fabric supplier who'd dealt with Pike's tactics before and hated him for it. The territorial government's response to Gideon's records request arrived 3 weeks after he'd sent it. It was a thick envelope containing dozens of documents, permits, inspection reports, safety certifications for Black Hollow's infrastructure. Gideon spread them across his loft floor and read through them by lamplight. What he found was damning. Pike's companies had been cutting corners for years, using substandard materials, skipping required safety inspections, falsifying reports to territorial authorities. The town's water system was a disaster waiting to happen. Pipes installed with cheap materials that should have been replaced 5 years ago, wells that hadn't been properly tested for contamination, pressure systems that exceeded safe operating limits. If the territorial authorities knew the real condition of Black Hollow's infrastructure, they'd shut Pike down and potentially file criminal charges. This was the leverage Gideon had been looking for. He made copies of the most damaging documents and drafted a letter to the territorial inspector's office detailing the violations. Then he sat back and considered his options. He could send the letter anonymously. That would be safest. Pike would never know who'd reported him, and the authorities would investigate regardless of the source. Or he could confront Pike directly. Use the threat of exposure as leverage to make him back off from Clara, to stop the harassment and the violence. It was a dangerous choice. Pike was already trying to destroy them. Giving him a direct target might make things worse. But Gideon was tired of fighting from the shadows, tired of Pike acting like he was untouchable. The next morning, he rolled into Pike's trading post carrying a folder of documents. The interior was busy, customers browsing goods, clerks taking orders, Pike himself standing near the back reviewing inventory with one of his managers. He looked up when Gideon entered, and his expression went cold. Get out of my store. I have something you need to see. Gideon held up the folder. I don't need to see anything from you. It's about your infrastructure contracts and the violations you've been hiding from territorial authorities. The room went quiet. Pike's manager looked between them uncertainly. Pike's jaw tightened. Everyone out, Pike said. Now. The customers and clerks filed out quickly. When the store was empty, Pike walked over to Gideon. You're threatening me. I'm informing you. There's a difference. Gideon opened the folder and pulled out copies of the most damaging documents. Your water system is a death trap. Your bridges are structurally unsound. You've been falsifying safety inspections for years. If the territorial authorities find out, and they will find out, you'll lose every contract you have and probably face criminal charges. Pike's face had gone red. Where did you get those? Public records. Anyone can request them. Those are confidential. They're public records filed with the territorial government. Nothing confidential about them. Gideon met Pike's eyes. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to stop harassing Clara Whitmore. You're going to forgive her supposed debts. And you're going to leave both of us alone. Or what? Or I send these documents to the territorial inspector along with a detailed account of your fraudulent practices. Gideon tapped the folder. I've already made copies. I've already drafted the letter. All I have to do is mail it. Pike stared at him for a long moment. Then he smiled. A cold, vicious expression. You think you've won. You think you've backed me into a corner. I think I've given you a choice. Here's my choice. Pike leaned down, putting his face close to Gideon's. I'm going to destroy you. Not quickly. Slowly. I'm going to take everything from you piece by piece until you're begging to leave this town. And if you send that letter, I'll make sure Clara Whitmore pays for it. She'll lose everything. Her business, her property, her life. You're threatening to murder her? I'm stating a fact. Accidents happen. Buildings catch fire. People get hurt. Pike straightened. You're playing a game you can't win, cripple, because you have something to lose and I don't. Think about that before you mail any letters. He walked to the door and opened it. Get out! Gideon rolled out into the cold street, his hands shaking. He'd miscalculated badly. He'd thought showing Pike the evidence would make him back down. Instead, it had just escalated the threat. Buildings catch fire. The words echoed in Gideon's head as he made his way back to Clara's property. Pike wasn't bluffing. Men like him didn't bluff, they acted. He found Clara in the laundry building, working through a load of sheets. When she saw his face, she set down the fabric she was holding. What happened? He told her everything. About the documents, the confrontation, Pike's threats. Clara listened in silence. When he finished, she sat down heavily on a wooden crate. He's going to burn us out, she said. Just like he burned out the Johnsons 4 years ago. Just like he burned the old mill when the owner wouldn't sell. You knew he'd done this before? Everyone knows. Nobody talks about it because talking about it makes you a target. She looked at Gideon. You should send that letter. Turn him into the authorities. If I do that, he'll come after you. He's already coming after me. At least this way he faces consequences. The consequences won't come fast enough to protect you. By the time the territorial inspectors investigate, he could burn this place to the ground with us in it. Clara's face was pale but determined. Then we'll watch for fires. We'll take turns keeping guard. We'll live in fear waiting for him to make his move. Gideon shook his head. There has to be another way. There isn't. You know there isn't. Clara stood up. Send the letter, Gideon. Let the authorities deal with him. And if he kills us before they do, then at least we die knowing we tried to do something right. That night, Gideon sat in his loft with the letter to the territorial inspectors in front of him. All he had to do was seal it and drop it in the mail. Pike would be investigated, probably prosecuted, definitely ruined. But Clara would be at risk until that happened. Days, maybe weeks of waiting for Pike to retaliate. Gideon put the letter aside and tried to think of alternatives. He could go to Doc Lindsay, ask him to rally other townspeople against Pike. But most people were too afraid or too indebted to act. He could try to get Eleanor Graves involved. She had status and land, and Pike needed her cooperation for some of his schemes. But she'd already shown what she thought of Gideon. Every path led back to the same conclusion. He was one man in a wheelchair with no money, no connections, and no power. And Pike was a wealthy, influential merchant with the law in his pocket and violence at his disposal. It wasn't a fair fight. It had never been a fair fight. Around midnight, Gideon smelled smoke. He jerked awake, his heart hammering. The smell was faint but unmistakable, wood burning, somewhere close. He got into his wheelchair and maneuvered to the window. Outside, he could see orange light flickering in the darkness. Not at Clara's property, somewhere in town. He used the pulley to lower himself down and rolled toward the house. Clara was already outside, staring at the glow. Something's burning, she said. They could hear shouts now, bells ringing, people yelling for water. The fire was in the center of town, multiple buildings away from Clara's property. Stay here, Gideon said. Keep watch in case this is a distraction. Where are you going? To see what's burning. He rolled toward town as fast as his arms could push. The main street was chaos, people running with buckets, forming a water line from the town well. The fire was at the old warehouse building on 2nd Street, a structure that had been abandoned for years. Flames poured from the windows and smoke billowed into the night sky. Anyone inside? Someone shouted. Don't think so, another voice answered. Place has been empty for months. But then, cutting through the noise, came a child's scream. Everyone froze. The scream came again, high and terrified, coming from inside the burning building. Someone's in there, a woman shrieked. There's someone in there. The crowd surged forward, but the heat drove them back. The fire was too intense, the structure too unstable. The front entrance was completely engulfed. The back door, someone yelled. Try the back. Men ran around the building. Gideon followed, rolling as fast as he could through the mud and debris. The back entrance was locked and smoke was pouring through the cracks around the doorframe. Break it down, someone shouted. 2 men threw themselves against the door. It shuddered but held. They tried again. The door cracked but didn't open. Inside, the child screamed again. Gideon looked at the building, his engineer's mind automatically assessing the structure. The fire was concentrated on the first floor, spreading fast. The second floor was starting to catch, but the flames hadn't fully engulfed it yet. The child's screams were coming from above. Second floor, probably trapped by smoke and heat. The men finally broke through the back door. Smoke billowed out, black and choking. One man tried to rush inside and immediately staggered back, coughing. "Can't see anything! Too much smoke!" "We need to get up there," someone else shouted. But the interior stairs were burning. No one could reach the second floor. Gideon's eyes went to the exterior wall. There was a loading door on the second level, a wide opening where goods had once been hauled up by rope and pulley. The pulley mechanism was still there, rusted and probably unsafe, but intact. An insane idea formed in his mind. "I can get up there," he said. The men turned to look at him. One of them, Garrett the blacksmith, said, "What?" "The loading door. I can use the pulley to reach it. You're in a wheelchair. I know what I'm in." Gideon was already moving toward the pulley system. "I need someone to work the winch and rope. Strong rope." "This is crazy," someone said. "That child is dying," Gideon shot back. "We don't have time to argue." Garrett looked at the burning building, at Gideon, then made a decision. "Get the rope from my forge. Move." Men scattered. Within minutes, they'd rigged a rough harness around Gideon's chest and attached it to the loading pulley. The mechanism groaned when they tested it, but it held. "You sure about this?" Garrett asked. Gideon looked up at the second-floor loading door. Smoke was starting to pour from it, but the flames hadn't reached it yet. If he could get inside, if he could find the child, if the floor didn't collapse beneath him. Too many ifs. But the child was still screaming. "I'm sure," Gideon said. "Pull me up." Garrett and 3 other men began working the winch. The rope creaked. The pulley squealed. Gideon rose into the air, spinning slightly as the harness took his weight. The heat intensified as he climbed. Smoke stung his eyes and throat. Below, the crowd watched in stunned silence as the crippled man rose toward the burning building. The pulley jerked and stopped when he reached the loading door level. He was 3 feet from the opening, dangling in empty air. "Swing me!" he shouted down. Someone grabbed the rope and pulled, creating a pendulum motion. Gideon swung once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th swing, he grabbed the edge of the loading door and pulled himself through. The interior was hell. Smoke so thick he couldn't see more than a few feet, heat that felt like it was cooking his skin. The floor beneath him was wooden planks that groaned ominously with every movement. "Hello!" he shouted. His voice came out as a croak. "Where are you?" The child screamed again, closer now, maybe 20 feet away. Gideon lowered himself from his chair onto the floor. His useless legs dragged behind him as he crawled through the smoke, using his arms to pull himself forward. The floor was hot enough to burn his palms even through his gloves. "Keep screaming," he called. "I'm coming." He found the child huddled in a corner behind some old crates. A boy, maybe 7 years old, his face streaked with soot and tears. The kid's eyes went wide when he saw Gideon crawling toward him. "It's okay," Gideon said. His voice was barely working now, destroyed by smoke. "I'm getting you out." He grabbed the boy and pulled him close. The child was coughing, barely conscious. Gideon looked back toward the loading door. It seemed impossibly far away, and the smoke was getting thicker. The floor groaned. Gideon started crawling, dragging the boy with one arm while pulling himself forward with the other. His lungs burned. His vision was starting to tunnel. The heat was unbearable. Halfway to the door, part of the floor collapsed behind them with a roar. Flames shot up through the gap. Gideon kept moving. His arms were shaking. The smoke was so thick he couldn't see the door anymore, could only aim for where he thought it should be. The boy had gone limp, dead weight in his arm. His hand hit empty air, the loading door. He'd reached it. "We're here!" he tried to shout, but nothing came out except a wheeze. Below, someone must have seen them, because suddenly the rope harness was being pulled up from outside. Hands grabbed him, grabbed the boy, hauled them both through the opening. They descended in a tangle of rope and bodies. When they reached the ground, someone pulled the boy away. Someone else was slapping Gideon's back, and he realized dimly that his coat was smoking. He lay on the cold mud and coughed until he thought his lungs would tear. Everything hurt. His hands were blistered. His throat felt like he'd swallowed glass. But the boy was crying, which meant he was alive. Gideon had done it. Somehow, impossibly, he'd done it. Doc Lindsay appeared, kneeling beside him. "Don't try to talk. Just breathe." Gideon breathed. It hurt, but he did it. Around him, people were still fighting the fire, but the crowd had grown silent. They were staring at him, at the man in the wheelchair who'd just crawled through a burning building to save a child. Clara pushed through the crowd and dropped to her knees beside him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something that might have been terror or pride, or both. "You stupid, crazy, impossible man," she whispered. Gideon tried to smile. It probably looked more like a grimace. The fire burned for another hour before the town got it under control. By the time the smoke cleared and dawn began to break, the warehouse was a collapsed ruin, but the surrounding buildings had been saved. The boy Gideon had rescued was named Tommy Brennan, the son of the general store owner who'd dismissed Gideon so coldly when he'd first arrived. Brennan stood with his arm around his son, staring at Gideon with an expression of stunned disbelief. "How did he even get in there?" someone asked. "Playing," Tommy wheezed. "Was playing inside with Eddie. Door closed behind us. Eddie got out a window. I got lost in the smoke." "You were told never to go in that building," Brennan said, but his voice was shaking. Tommy started crying. "I'm sorry, Pa. I'm sorry." Brennan pulled his son close, and over the boy's head, he looked at Gideon. Their eyes met. Gideon saw something shift in the store owner's face, a wall coming down, a judgment being reversed. "Thank you," Brennan said quietly. I don't have words. Thank you." Gideon nodded. He still couldn't speak properly. As the crowd dispersed, Sheriff Dawes appeared. He looked at the ruined warehouse, at Gideon sitting in his mud-covered wheelchair, at the gathered townspeople. "How'd the fire start?" he asked. "Don't know yet," Garrett said. Building's been abandoned for months." "Abandoned buildings don't catch fire by themselves. Maybe someone was squatting. Maybe they knocked over a lamp." Dawes looked skeptical. "Or maybe someone set it." The crowd went quiet. Everyone was thinking the same thing. Pike. But no one said it out loud. Dawes turned to Gideon. "That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the dumbest. Maybe both." "Kid needed help," Gideon rasped. "You could have died." "So could he." Dawes studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "Get yourself to Doc Lindsay's office. Those burns need treatment." As Clara helped Gideon toward the doctors, people reached out to touch his shoulder, to grip his hand. They didn't say much. Most seemed too overwhelmed for words. But their faces said everything. The man they'd dismissed as half a person had just proven he had more courage than any of them. And back at his trading post, Harlan Pike stood at his window watching the smoke rise over town. And for the first time in years, he felt something like fear. Doc Lindsay worked on Gideon's burns in silence, his weathered hands surprisingly gentle as he cleaned blistered palms and wrapped them in clean bandages. The office smelled like carbolic acid and tobacco smoke. Outside the window, Black Hollow was waking up to the aftermath of the fire, people sweeping ash from their porches, talking in hushed clusters about what had happened. "You're lucky," Doc finally said. "These could have been a lot worse. Keep them clean, change the dressings twice a day, and don't do anything stupid with your hands for at least a week." "Define stupid." Doc gave him a flat look. "You just crawled through a burning building. I don't think you and I share the same definition of stupid." Clara had been sitting in the corner, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. "How long before he can work again?" "Depends on what kind of work. Light repairs, maybe 4 or 5 days. Anything requiring grip strength, 2 weeks minimum." "We don't have 2 weeks," Clara said. "We've got contracts to fill." "Then you'll figure something out. But if he tears these burns open, they'll get infected, and then you'll have bigger problems than laundry contracts." Doc Lindsay turned to Gideon. "Your lungs sound rough. You need rest." "I'll rest when I'm dead." "That might be sooner than you think if you keep pulling stunts like last night." The doctor packed away his supplies. "No charge for the treatment. Consider it payment for saving young Tommy." After they left, Clara drove the wagon in silence. Gideon watched the town roll past, people stopping their conversations to stare at him, some nodding respectfully, others just looking confused. The man in the wheelchair had become something else overnight, something they didn't quite know how to categorize anymore. "You scared me," Clara said finally. Her voice was tight. "When I saw you go up on that rope, when the building started collapsing, I thought you were going to die. I thought so too for a minute there. This isn't funny. I'm not laughing. She pulled the wagon to a stop in the middle of the empty road. When she looked at him, her eyes were wet. Don't do that again. Don't risk yourself like that. I can't. She stopped, swallowed. I can't lose you. The words hung in the cold air between them. Gideon felt something shift in his chest, a recognition of what had been building between them for weeks without either of them acknowledging it. Clara, don't. Just don't say anything. She wiped her eyes roughly and snapped the reins. The mule started forward again. They didn't talk the rest of the way home. Over the next 2 days, something changed in Black Hollow. People who'd crossed the street to avoid Gideon now stopped to thank him. Tom Bradshaw showed up at Clara's property with a basket of food from his mother. Garrett brought scrap metal for repairs, refusing payment. Even Mr. Brennan came by, awkward and formal, to shake Gideon's bandaged hand. I misjudged you, Brennan said. I'm sorry for that. If you need anything from the store, you just ask. I'll make sure you're treated fairly. After he left, Clara said, You realize what's happening, don't you? You're becoming respectable. Terrifying thought. I'm serious. People see you differently now. They can't dismiss you anymore. Gideon looked at his bandaged hands. One good deed doesn't erase who I am. No, but it makes them question their assumptions. That's something. But not everyone was ready to reconsider their opinions. On the third day after the fire, Pike's lawyer showed up at Clara's property, a thin man in an expensive suit with papers in a leather case. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm James Thornton, representing Mr. Harlan Pike's business interests. I need to speak with you about your outstanding debts. I don't have outstanding debts, Clara said. Thornton opened his case and pulled out documents. According to Mr. Pike's records, you owe approximately $193 across various accounts. We've been patient, but payment is now overdue. If you cannot satisfy the debt immediately, we'll need to discuss collateral seizure. Those debts are fraudulent, Gideon said. He was sitting nearby, his bandaged hands resting in his lap. Pike's been falsifying her accounts. That's a serious accusation, Mr. Vale. And it's not an accusation, it's a fact. I have documentation proving the charges are fake. Thornton's expression didn't change. If you have evidence of fraudulent bookkeeping, you're welcome to present it in court. Until then, the recorded debts stand. We're not paying, Clara said. Then I'm afraid we'll have no choice but to begin seizure proceedings. We'll start with the wagon and equipment. Thornton tucked the papers back into his case. You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, Sheriff Dawes will be authorized to collect on Mr. Pike's behalf. After he left, Clara sat down heavily on her porch steps. He's not going to stop. Even after everything that happened with the fire, he's still coming after us. The fire probably made him more determined. Gideon rolled closer. He needs to prove he's still in control. Well, he is. We don't have $200. We don't have $50. Clara looked at him. What are we going to do? Gideon thought about the letter he'd drafted to the territorial authorities, about Pike's threats, about the 48 hours they had before losing everything. I'm going to mail that letter, he said. The one about Pike's infrastructure violations? Yes. He'll retaliate. You know he will. Let him try. The whole town just watched me pull a kid from a burning building. If Pike comes after us now, people will notice. They'll question it. Gideon met her eyes. We've got leverage we didn't have before. Public sentiment matters, even here. You're gambling our lives on public sentiment? I'm gambling our lives on the hope that people are tired of being afraid, that seeing someone stand up to Pike might inspire others to do the same. Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, When did you become an optimist? I wouldn't call it optimism, more like stubbornness disguised as strategy. Despite everything, Clara smiled. That sounds more accurate. That afternoon, Gideon rolled into town and mailed the letter to the territorial inspector's office. It cost him his last $2 in postage. As he watched the clerk stamp it and toss it into the outgoing mailbag, he felt equal parts relief and terror. He'd done it. There was no taking it back now. On the way back through town, he stopped at the general store. Brennan was behind the counter, and his expression grew wary when he saw Gideon. Mr. Vale, what can I do for you? I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Brennan glanced around the empty store. All right, The fire. Do you think Pike said it? The store owner's face went carefully blank. I wouldn't know anything about that. That's not what I asked. Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Then quietly, he said, That warehouse has been empty for 3 years. No reason for it to catch fire on its own. And the timing, he trailed off. But I can't prove anything. Neither can you. What if I could? What if I had evidence Pike's been breaking laws, hurting people, burning buildings to get what he wants? Would anyone care? People would care, but caring and acting are different things. Why? What's he got on everyone? Debts mostly. Mortgages, loans, credit accounts. Pike's got his fingers in everything. You cross him, he calls in what you owe and ruins you. Brennan wiped down the counter unnecessarily. He's been squeezing me for 2 years. That's why I wasn't friendly when you first came to town. Pike told me not to help you. And now? Now my son's alive because you risked your life to save him. I don't care what Pike says anymore. Brennan looked up. But I'm one man. Most folks, they're too scared or too deep in debt to stand up to him. What if they weren't alone? What if multiple people challenged him at once? You organizing some kind of rebellion? I'm considering options. Brennan studied him. You really mailed that letter, didn't you? The one about his infrastructure violations? How did you eat? Tom told me. He overheard you and Mrs. Whitmore talking. Brennan leaned against the counter. Pike's going to lose his mind when the territorial inspectors show up. He'll know someone reported him, and he'll assume it was you. Probably. He'll come after you hard. I know. You're not scared? Gideon thought about that. Terrified, but doing nothing felt worse. That evening, Doc Lindsay showed up at Clara's property with a bottle of whiskey and a troubled expression. He sat on the porch with Gideon while Clara worked inside. Heard you mailed a letter to the territorial government, Doc said, pouring whiskey into 2 tin cups. Word travels fast. In this town, word travels before you even think it. Doc handed him a cup. You know what you've done, right? You've declared war on the most powerful man in Black Hollow. He declared war on us first. Fair point. Doc drank. I also heard Pike's lawyer came by threatening seizure. He did. And you're just going to let Pike take Clara's property? No, I'm hoping the territorial inspectors arrive before that happens. That's a hell of a gamble. You have a better idea? Doc was quiet. Then he said, What if I told you Pike's already planning his next move, and it's worse than seizure? Gideon set down his cup. What do you mean? I was at the saloon last night. Heard some of Pike's men talking when they thought no one was listening. They were discussing permanent solutions to the cripple problem. Doc looked at him. They weren't talking about running you out of town, son. They were talking about making sure you don't talk to any territorial inspectors. They're planning to kill me. That's my interpretation, yes. Gideon felt ice in his stomach. He'd expected retaliation, but not murder, not openly. When? Don't know. Soon, probably. Before those inspectors arrive. Doc poured more whiskey. You could leave. Get on a train tonight. Disappear. Pike would have no reason to follow. And abandon Clara? Clara's not the target. You are. If you're gone, Pike will probably back off from her. He's got no reason to destroy her if you're not here defending her. Except spite. There's that. Doc drank. But at least she'd be alive. You, on the other hand, Gideon thought about the train that came through twice a week. He could be on it tomorrow, heading east, putting Black Hollow behind him forever. Clara would be disappointed, maybe even angry, but she'd be safe. And he'd spend the rest of his life knowing he'd run. I'm not leaving, he said. Doc sighed. Figured you'd say that. You're either the bravest man I've ever met or the most stubborn. Possibly both. Definitely both. All right then. If you're staying, you need to be smart about it. Don't go anywhere alone. Keep that rifle of Clara's close. And watch for Pike's men. They'll come when you least expect it. After Doc left, Gideon told Clara what he'd learned. She listened without interrupting, her face growing pale. You're leaving, she said when he finished. It wasn't a question. No. Don't be stupid. If Pike wants you dead, then I'll deal with it. I'm not running. Why not? What's worth dying for in this miserable town? You. The word hung between them. Clara stared at him, her mouth slightly open. I'm not leaving you alone to face him, Gideon continued. I'm not abandoning the one person who treated me like I mattered. So whatever's coming, we face it together. Clara's eyes filled with tears. You're going to get killed. Maybe. But at least I'll die standing up for something. That's more than I've done in years. She crossed the porch and kissed him, hard and desperate, tasting like salt and fear. When she pulled back, her hands were shaking. If you die, she whispered, I'm going to kill you. That seems redundant. I'm serious, Gideon. I know. He touched her face. I know. The 48 hours passed slowly. Gideon and Clara took turns keeping watch, neither of them sleeping more than a few hours at a time. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow seemed threatening. Pike's men didn't come, but on the morning of the third day, Thornton the lawyer returned with Sheriff Dawes and 2 deputies. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm here to execute a writ of seizure, Thornton announced. You failed to satisfy your debts within the specified time period. Therefore, Mr. Pike is legally entitled to collect collateral. Those debts are fake, Clara said. She was holding her rifle, though she hadn't raised it yet. That's for a court to determine. In the meantime, we're authorized to take possession of your wagon, your laundry equipment, and you're not taking anything, Gideon said. Dawes stepped forward. Mr. Vale, I don't want trouble, but I've got a legal writ here, and I'm going to enforce it. You and Mrs. Whitmore can file a dispute in court, but until then, these items are being seized. On what grounds? Fraudulent debts that can't be proven? On the grounds that Mr. Pike's records say she owes money and she can't prove otherwise. She has her own records, which could be falsified just as easily as you claim Pike's are. Dawes looked tired. I'm sorry, but this is how the law works. You want to challenge it, get a lawyer, and file an appeal. With what money? Clara said bitterly. We're broke because of Pike's harassment. That's not my problem. Now put down the rifle and step aside. For a moment, nobody moved. The deputies' hands moved toward their gun belts. Thornton took a step back. Gideon rolled forward, positioning himself between Clara and the lawmen. If you do this, he said quietly, you're just proving Pike owns this town. You're proving the law means nothing here except what Pike says it means. The law is what's written down, Dawes said. And what's written down says Pike's got a claim. Then the law's broken. Maybe, but I still have to enforce it. One of the deputies moved toward the wagon. Clara raised her rifle, and suddenly guns were being drawn all around. Don't, Dawes said sharply. Mrs. Whitmore, put the gun down. Nobody needs to die over a wagon. That wagon is my livelihood. You take it. You're taking everything I have. We're following legal procedure. You're robbing me on Pike's orders. Gideon grabbed Clara's arm. Don't. They'll shoot you. I don't care. I care. He looked at her, his voice urgent. They want you to resist. They want an excuse. Don't give it to them. Clara's hands were shaking. Tears ran down her face. But slowly, she lowered the rifle. The deputies moved quickly after that, unhitching the wagon, loading equipment. It took 20 minutes to strip everything Clara had worked years to build. When they finished, her property looked violated. Empty spaces where the wagon had stood, bare ground where the equipment had been. Thornton consulted his papers. The debt is partially satisfied. Mrs. Whitmore still owes approximately $47. We'll return for additional collateral if payment isn't received within 30 days. After they left, Clara sat on her porch steps and stared at nothing. She didn't cry, didn't rage, just sat there with the rifle across her knees, looking hollow. Gideon didn't know what to say. What could he say? Pike had won this round decisively. I should have shot them, Clara said finally. Her voice was flat. Should have shot them all. Then you'd be in jail or dead. At least I'd have fought back. You did fight back. You've been fighting back for weeks. This is just a setback. A setback? Clara laughed, a harsh, broken sound. He took everything, Gideon. I can't run a laundry business without equipment or a wagon. I'm finished. No, you're not. Yes, I am. And so are you if you stay here. Pike's going to keep coming after us until we're dead or gone. She looked at him. You need to leave. Get out while you still can. We've had this conversation, and now we're having it again. Leave, Gideon, please, before he kills you. I'm not... He was interrupted by the sound of horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. They both turned to see a group of riders approaching. 6 men, all armed, led by Pike himself. Pike dismounted and walked toward them with the confidence of a man who knew he'd already won. His men spread out, hands resting on gun belts. "Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Vale." Pike's voice was pleasant. "I thought I'd deliver a message personally." "We got your message," Clara said. "You stole my property." "I collected on legitimate debts. There's a difference." Pike smiled. "But I'm prepared to be generous. Mrs. Whitmore, I'll buy your land. Fair price, $200. That'll cover your remaining debts and leave you with a little extra to start over somewhere else." "My property's worth 10 times that." "Not anymore. Without equipment or a business, it's just empty land." Pike looked around as if appraising it. 200 is generous considering." "Go to hell." Pike's smile didn't waver. "You have 24 hours to consider my offer. After that, I'll have your remaining possessions seized to cover the outstanding debt, and you'll be left with nothing." He turned to Gideon. "As for you, Mr. Vale, I suggest you start packing. There's an eastbound train tomorrow morning. Be on it." "Or what?" "Or accidents happen. Buildings burn, people get hurt." Pike's voice dropped. "I hear the territorial inspectors received an interesting letter recently. Anonymous, of course, but full of wild accusations about infrastructure violations. I wonder who could have sent such lies." "Not lies. Facts." "Facts?" Pike laughed. "When the inspectors arrive, if they bother to investigate at all, they'll find everything in perfect order. I've already had my people review and update all the documentation. Any discrepancies will be explained away as clerical errors from years ago, long since corrected." He leaned closer. "You can't beat me, cripple. I own this town. I own the law. I own everyone and everything. You're just a bug I haven't bothered to step on yet." Gideon met his eyes. "You're scared." "Excuse me?" "You're scared. That's why you're here, making threats in person instead of sending your thugs. You're scared because for the first time in years, someone's challenging you and people are noticing. You're scared because I pulled that kid from the fire and now the town sees me differently. You're scared because your power is based on fear. And fear only works until someone stops being afraid." Pike's smile vanished. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "I know exactly what I'm dealing with. A bully who built his empire on other people's misery, and bullies always fall eventually." "Not before I destroy you first." Pike straightened. 24 hours, Mrs. Whitmore. After that, you get nothing." He mounted his horse. "And you, Vale, be on that train, because if you're still here tomorrow afternoon, you won't live to see evening." They rode off, leaving dust hanging in the air. Clara turned to Gideon. "He meant that. The threat. He's going to kill you. Probably. Then leave." "No." "Why? What's the point of dying here?" Gideon looked at the empty spaces where her wagon and equipment had been. At the property she'd fought so hard to keep. At Clara herself, exhausted, frightened, but still standing. "Because someone has to stop him," he said. "And if not me, then who?" That night they didn't sleep. They sat together on the porch, watching the road, waiting for whatever was coming. Around midnight, Tom Bradshaw appeared, riding a horse and looking terrified. "Mr. Vale, Mrs. Whitmore." He dismounted quickly. "You need to hear this. Pike's men are in the saloon right now, drinking and talking. They're planning something for tomorrow. Something bad." "What kind of something?" "They didn't say exactly, but—" Tom swallowed. "They kept talking about making sure you don't make it to testify when the inspectors come. And they were laughing about how they'd make it look like an accident." "When tomorrow?" "Afternoon, I think. They said something about waiting until after the train leaves so you can't escape." After Tom left, Clara loaded her rifle and checked every window and door. Gideon sat in the dark, thinking through options. They had maybe 12 hours before Pike's men made their move. Not enough time to get help, not enough time to do much of anything except prepare to defend themselves. "We can't win this fight," Clara said. "You know that, right? Even if we kill some of his men, Pike will just send more. We'll either die or end up in jail." "I know. So what's your plan?" "I don't have one. Not a good one anyway." Clara laughed bitterly. "That's not reassuring." "No, but it's honest." They sat in silence, listening to the wind. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "I'm glad you came here," Clara said suddenly. "Even with everything that's happened, I'm glad you didn't give up and leave when Eleanor Graves rejected you." "Yeah?" "Yeah, you made me remember what it feels like to have someone on your side. I'd forgotten that." Gideon reached out and took her hand. She held on tight, her fingers cold and strong. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "we face it together." "Together," Clara agreed. And in the darkness they waited for dawn and whatever it would bring. Dawn came cold and gray, the sky threatening snow. Gideon watched it brighten through the window, his body stiff from sitting up all night. Clara had dozed fitfully in the chair beside him, the rifle still across her lap, jerking awake at every small sound. Around 7, she made coffee with hands that shook slightly. They drank it in silence, both of them listening for the sound of approaching horses that would signal Pike's men were coming. But the morning stayed quiet. "Maybe they changed their plans," Clara said, though she didn't sound convinced. "Or maybe they're waiting for the right moment." The eastbound train whistle sounded at 9:30, its lonely cry carrying across the frozen landscape. Gideon imagined it pulling away from the station, his last chance at escape disappearing into the distance. The thought didn't bother him as much as it probably should have. Around 10, Doc Lindsay arrived in his wagon, looking grim. "Came to check on you two," he said. "Whole town's talking about what happened yesterday. Pike seizing Clara's property, making threats." He climbed down stiffly. "Also heard some disturbing rumors about what might happen today." "Tom already warned us," Gideon said. "Good. Then you know to be careful." Doc pulled a revolver from his coat pocket and handed it to Gideon. "You know how to use one of these?" "I do, but—" "No buts. Pike's men aren't coming for a conversation." Doc looked at Clara. "You should come stay at my place, both of you, at least until this blows over." "It's not going to blow over," Clara said. "Pike won't stop until we're gone or dead." "Then maybe you should be gone. Live to fight another day." "We're done running," Gideon said. Doc sighed. "Figured you'd say that." He started to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, there are people in town who think what Pike's doing is wrong. They're just too scared to say it out loud." "Fear's a powerful thing," Gideon said. "So is courage. You showed them that with the fire. Some folks are remembering what it looks like to stand up for something." Doc climbed back onto his wagon. "Don't know if it'll matter in the end, but thought you should know you're not as alone as Pike wants you to think." After he left, Gideon checked the revolver. It was well-maintained, fully loaded. He set it on the table within easy reach. 11 o'clock came and went, then noon. The waiting was worse than the threat itself. Sitting in the growing tension, knowing something was coming, but not when or how. Around 1 in the afternoon, Clara was at the window when she stiffened. Riders, 6 of them. Gideon rolled to the window. Pike's men were approaching slowly, spread out in a line. They weren't trying to hide their intentions. This was meant to be public, witnessed, a message to anyone else who might think about challenging Pike. "Stay inside," Gideon said. "Let me talk to them first." "You think talking is going to work?" "No, but maybe I can buy us time." He rolled out onto the porch, the revolver in his lap covered by a blanket. The riders stopped about 30 yards away. Their leader, the stocky man with the broken nose from before, dismounted and walked closer. "Mr. Vale, you missed your train. Decided to stay. Scenery's nice here." "That's unfortunate. Mr. Pike was very clear about what should happen if you were still here this afternoon." "I'm sure he was. But here's the thing. If something happens to me, those territorial inspectors are going to have a lot of questions. Hard to explain away a murder when everyone knows Pike threatened me the day before." The man smiled. "Who said anything about murder? We're here to help you relocate. Got a wagon waiting in town to take you to the next county. You can catch a train from there." "And if I refuse? Then things get difficult." The man gestured and the other riders spread out, surrounding the property. "We don't want trouble, Mr. Vale, but we'll do what needs doing." Behind Gideon, the door opened. Clara stepped out with her rifle raised. "Touch him and I shoot," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore, put the gun down. This doesn't concern you." "Everything about this property concerns me. You're on my land. Get off it." The man's expression hardened. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Good. I hope it's impossible." For a moment, nobody moved. Then, from the direction of town came the sound of more riders. A lot of them. Everyone turned to look. Coming down the road was a group of maybe 20 people, some on horses, some in wagons, some on foot. Gideon recognized faces. Tom Bradshaw, Garrett the blacksmith, Mr. Brennan with his son Tommy, Doc Lindsay, the widow Parsons, even Mrs. Morrison from the boarding house. They spread out in a rough line between Pike's men and Clara's property, and suddenly the odds had changed dramatically. Garrett urged his horse forward. "Morning, boys. Heard there might be trouble out here. Thought we'd come see what was happening." Pike's man looked at the crowd, his confidence visibly shaken. "This is private business." "Nothing private about it when the whole town knows Pike sent you to kill Mr. Vale," Brennan said. His voice was steady. "That's what you're here for, isn't it? To make sure he doesn't talk to the territorial inspectors." "We're just here to help him relocate." "You're here to murder him," Doc Lindsay interrupted. "And we're here to make sure that doesn't happen." Tom Bradshaw, looking terrified but determined, added, "Mr. Vale saved my life. I'm not letting you hurt him." Pike's men looked at each other uncertainly. They'd been prepared for a quick, brutal confrontation. They hadn't been prepared for half the town showing up. "This is none of your concern," Pike's man said. "Go home before someone gets hurt." "Can't do that," Garrett said. "See, we're tired of Pike running this town like his personal kingdom. Tired of watching him destroy anyone who doesn't bow down. Mr. Vale had the guts to stand up to him, and we figure it's time we did the same. You'll regret this, all of you. Pike will what?" Clara's voice cut through. "Destroy us? He's already destroying us. At least this way we're fighting back." The standoff stretched out. Pike's men were outnumbered 3-1, and everyone knew it. Finally, their leader mounted his horse. "You just made a big mistake," he said. "All of you." "Maybe," Gideon said, "but it's our mistake to make." The men rode off, but their retreat felt more like a postponement than a surrender. After they left, the crowd gathered closer. People Gideon had barely spoken to, people who'd ignored him for weeks, were suddenly there looking concerned and determined. "That was either really brave or really stupid," Mrs. Morrison said. "Possibly both." "Definitely both," Doc agreed. But Pike needed to see that people aren't as scared as he thinks. "He's going to retaliate," Clara said. "Against all of you. You know that, right? Let him try." Brennan put his arm around Tommy's shoulders. "My boy's alive because of Mr. Vale. I'm not going to stand by while Pike tries to kill him." "None of us are," Garrett added. "We've let Pike control this town for too long. Maybe it's time that changed." Tom Bradshaw, his voice shaking but earnest, said, "Mr. Vale showed us we don't have to accept things just because they've always been that way. If he can fight back from a wheelchair, the rest of us have no excuse." Gideon felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not quite hope. Hope felt too optimistic for the situation, but something like solidarity, like belonging. "Thank you," he said, "all of you. But you need to understand what you're risking. Pike doesn't forgive, and he doesn't forget." "Neither do we," the widow Parsons said quietly. "He destroyed my shop 3 years ago with false debts, just like he's trying to do to Clara. I lost everything, and nobody helped because everyone was too scared. Well, I'm tired of being scared." Others nodded, murmuring agreement. These weren't revolutionaries or heroes. They were ordinary people who'd reached their limit. Doc Lindsay addressed the group. "If we're doing this, if we're really standing against Pike, we need to be smart about it. He's got money and connections. He'll come at us through the law, through business, through intimidation. We need to be prepared." "What do you suggest?" Garrett asked. "Documentation. Everyone who's been victimized by Pike needs to record what happened. Dates, amounts, witnesses. We build a case so solid that even his bought judges can't ignore it." "And in the meantime?" Claire asked. "In the meantime, we watch each other's backs. Nobody faces Pike alone." The group talked for another hour, making plans, sharing stories of Pike's abuses, building a coalition out of shared grievances and newfound courage. When they finally dispersed, Gideon sat on the porch feeling simultaneously exhausted and energized. Clara sat beside him. "That was unexpected." "Yeah. You think it'll last? Or will they lose their nerve when Pike really comes after them?" "I don't know. But at least for today, we're not alone." That evening, Sheriff Dawes showed up. He looked uncomfortable, his usually tired expression even more worn. "Need to talk to you both," he said without preamble. "About what?" Clara asked. "About what happened this afternoon. Pike's men filed a complaint, said you threatened them with weapons, refused to cooperate with a lawful relocation order." "Relocation order?" Gideon stared at him. "They were going to kill me." "That's not what their report says. And without proof otherwise, it's their word against yours." Dawes shifted his weight. Pike's pushing for me to arrest you both for assault and obstruction. Are you going to? Dawes was quiet for a long moment. No, because I know what really happened this afternoon. I know Pike sent those men to hurt you, and I know half the town showed up to stop it. He met Gideon's eyes. I also know about the letter you sent to the territorial inspectors. Gideon's stomach dropped. How? Pike's got people in the territorial office. They sent word that an investigation's coming. Inspectors will be here next week. Dawes sat down heavily on the porch steps. Pike's panicking. That's why he's escalating. He knows if those inspectors find what you reported, he's finished. So he's trying to eliminate the witness, Claire said. Exactly. But here's the thing. With half the town now defending you, he can't just make you disappear quietly. Too many witnesses, too many people asking questions. Dawes rubbed his face. Pike's power is based on people being isolated. What happened today broke that pattern. What does that mean for us? Gideon asked. It means you might actually survive this. Maybe. Dawes stood up. But you need to be careful. Cornered animals are the most dangerous, and Pike's feeling cornered right now. After the sheriff left, Gideon and Clara sat in the growing darkness. We might actually win this, Clara said quietly. I didn't think that was possible. We haven't won yet. Pike still has cards to play. But we have a chance. That's more than we had yesterday. That night, Gideon slept better than he had in weeks. Not because the danger had passed, but because the weight of fighting alone had lifted. The next morning brought news that rippled through Black Hollow like a stone through water. Eleanor Graves had arrived in town and was asking to see Gideon. Clara looked skeptical when Tom Bradshaw delivered the message. Why would she want to see you now? I have no idea, but I should probably find out. Eleanor was waiting at the hotel restaurant, sitting at a corner table with coffee, and an expression that suggested she hadn't slept well. She'd aged since Gideon had last seen her, more lines around her eyes, a tiredness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. Mr. Vale, thank you for meeting me. Mrs. Graves, Gideon rolled up to the table. What can I do for you? She studied her coffee cup. I heard about what's been happening. Pike's harassment, the fire, yesterday's confrontation. She looked up. I also heard about the letter you sent to the territorial authorities. Word really does travel fast in this town. I have sources. Eleanor took a breath. I need to tell you something. Pike's been blackmailing me for 3 years. Gideon hadn't expected that. What? After my husband died, I made some poor business decisions. Borrowed money I couldn't repay, entered into contracts I didn't fully understand. Pike helped me, or so I thought. Turned out he was just documenting everything he could use against me. Her voice was bitter. He's been holding my ranch hostage. Do what he says or he calls in the debts, and I lose everything. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm tired of being afraid. And because I owe you an explanation. Eleanor met his eyes. When you arrived at the train station, I'd been planning to offer you a legitimate partnership, but Pike found out. Told me if I hired you, he'd destroy me. So She stopped, swallowing. I said those things. Called you half a man. Humiliated you in front of everyone. Because I was too much of a coward to stand up to him. Gideon felt the old anger stir, remembering that moment on the platform. But looking at Eleanor now, at her shame and exhaustion, he found the anger had lost its edge. Why tell me now? Because you did what I couldn't. You stood up to him, and watching you fight, watching the town rally around you yesterday, it made me realize I can't keep living like this. Eleanor pulled papers from her bag. These are records of every illegal thing Pike's made me do. False contracts, fraudulent transactions, blackmail threats, everything documented. She pushed the papers across the table. Give these to the territorial inspectors. Combined with your infrastructure violations, it should be enough to destroy him completely. Gideon looked at the documents, then at Eleanor. This will implicate you too. I know, I'll probably face charges, lose my ranch regardless. She smiled sadly. But at least I'll be free of him, and maybe I can sleep at night again. Why didn't you do this years ago? Because I was scared and alone, and convinced that this was just how things were. Eleanor stood up. You showed me something different was possible. Even when everyone rejected you, even when Pike tried to destroy you, you kept fighting. That kind of courage. Her voice caught. That's what I should have had from the beginning. After she left, Gideon sat with the documents, processing what had just happened. The woman who destroyed him on his first day in Black Hollow had just handed him the keys to destroying the town's most powerful man. He took the papers to Doc Lindsay's office, where an impromptu gathering of Pike's victims had assembled. They spent the afternoon going through Eleanor's documents, matching them with their own records, building a comprehensive case. "This is it," Doc said, spreading papers across his desk. "Infrastructure violations, fraud, blackmail, intimidation. The territorial inspectors can't ignore this." "When do they arrive?" Garrett asked. 3 days, according to Sheriff Dawes. "Pike knows that too," Clara said. "He's going to make his move before then." She was right. That night, Gideon woke to the smell of smoke again. But this time it wasn't some distant warehouse. This time it was Clara's house. He hauled himself into his wheelchair and rolled to the door. Flames were climbing the exterior wall, spreading fast. Clara was already outside, having smelled it first, trying to beat back the fire with a blanket. "It's no use," she shouted. "It's spreading too fast." Gideon rolled down the ramp he'd built what felt like a lifetime ago, and joined her. The heat was intense, the flames already reaching the roof. Everything Clara owned was inside that house. People started arriving. Neighbors who'd seen the glow, townspeople who'd been keeping watch. They formed a bucket line, drawing water from the well, but everyone could see it was hopeless. The house was going to burn. "The laundry building," Clara suddenly shouted. "If the wind shifts, it'll catch too." Garrett and several others ran to wet down the laundry building's walls, trying to create a fire break. Meanwhile, the house collapsed in on itself with a roar of flame and crashing timber. Clara stood watching her home burn, her face illuminated by the fire. She wasn't crying, she just looked empty. "He's going to pay for this," Gideon said. "How? We can't prove he did it. We can't prove anything." But she was wrong. Tom Bradshaw came running up, his face flushed with excitement and anger. "I saw them! Pike's men! They were riding away when I was coming to check on you. One of them still had a torch." "Did anyone else see?" Doc asked. "Yeah, the Johnsons saw them too, and Mrs. Parsons. They were heading back toward town, not even trying to hide." This was different from the warehouse fire. This time, there were witnesses. This time, Pike had gotten sloppy. Sheriff Dawes arrived as dawn broke, surveying the smoking ruins of Clara's house. When Doc told him about the witnesses, his expression turned grim. "I need statements from everyone who saw Pike's men." "You're actually going to do something?" Clara's voice was sharp with disbelief. "I don't have a choice anymore. Too many witnesses, too many people watching." Dawes looked tired. "I've been turning a blind eye to Pike's methods for years because it was easier than fighting him. But this, burning down homes, trying to kill people, I can't ignore it anymore." "Pike will fire you," Gideon said. "Probably, but I should have stood up to him a long time ago. Better late than never." Dawes arrested 3 of Pike's men that morning. They were the ones multiple witnesses had identified, including the man who'd been carrying the torch. Pike bailed them out by noon, but the damage was done. The town had seen them arrested, had seen the sheriff finally act. Pike himself came to survey the scene around midday, looking at the ruins of Clara's house with an expression Gideon couldn't quite read. "This is unfortunate," Pike said. "Terrible accident." "It wasn't an accident," Gideon said. "Your men said it. We have witnesses." Witnesses can be mistaken, especially in the dark. 6 different witnesses, all mistaken in the same way? Pike's jaw tightened. "You're making a serious accusation." "I'm stating a fact. You ordered this fire because you're desperate. The territorial inspectors arrive in 2 days, and you know what they're going to find. They'll find that my companies have been serving this community faithfully for years. They'll find fraud, blackmail, and falsified safety reports. They'll find enough evidence to put you in prison for a decade." Gideon rolled closer. "It's over, Pike. You've already lost." For a moment, Pike's mask slipped. Gideon saw raw fury beneath the polished exterior, a rage that had probably been building since the first time someone had challenged him. "I haven't lost anything yet," Pike said quietly. "And neither have you, apparently." He looked at Clara. "Your house burned down, but you're both still alive. That seems like an oversight." The threat was explicit now. No more pretense of civility. "Touch them and you'll answer to all of us," Garrett said. He'd been standing nearby with a dozen other townspeople, all of them watching Pike with expressions ranging from anger to contempt. Pike looked at the crowd, and something in his face changed. He'd always relied on isolation, on picking off his enemies one at a time, while everyone else looked away. But these people weren't looking away anymore. "You're all fools," he said. "Every one of you. You think you've won something, but you've just made yourselves my enemies, and I destroy my enemies." "Not anymore, you don't," Doc Lindsay said. "Your time's over, Pike. You're just too stubborn to see it yet." Pike left without another word, but everyone could see the calculation in his eyes. He was planning something, a final move before the inspectors arrived. That night, Clara moved what few possessions had survived into the laundry building loft where Gideon lived. It was cramped and cold and nothing like a proper home, but it was shelter. "I have nothing left," Clara said, sitting on the floor amid her salvaged belongings. "My house is gone. Most of my equipment is still seized. I'm exactly where Pike wanted me, broken and defeated." "You're not broken." "How would you know?" "Because broken people give up. You're still fighting." Clara laughed bitterly. "Fighting for what? I don't even know anymore." Gideon took her hand. "For the right to exist without being crushed. For the chance to build something that's yours. For the same things I'm fighting for." "And if we lose?" "Then at least we lose together. That counts for something." Clara squeezed his hand and they sat in silence, listening to the wind outside. The territorial inspectors arrived 2 days later, 3 stern men in official uniforms carrying leather cases full of documentation. They set up in the hotel and began their investigation immediately. Gideon gave them everything: the infrastructure violations, Eleanor's blackmail evidence, witness statements about the fires, records of fraudulent debts. He talked until his throat was raw, explaining Pike's systematic abuse of power. The lead inspector, a gray-haired man named Morrison, listened with an expression that gave nothing away. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Vale. They're all documented, every single one. We'll need to examine Mr. Pike's records, interview witnesses, verify the claims." "How long will that take?" "However long it takes to ensure justice is served properly." Morrison closed his folder. "In the meantime, I'm placing a temporary hold on all of Mr. Pike's business operations pending investigation." It wasn't an arrest, but it was something. Pike couldn't seize any more property, couldn't enforce any more debts, couldn't operate his businesses until the investigation concluded. Word spread through Black Hollow within hours. Pike's empire was frozen. For the first time in years, he had no power. But a cornered animal is most dangerous. That evening, Pike came to the laundry building alone. No men, no weapons visible, just him standing in the mud looking at Gideon and Clara. "You've destroyed me," he said. Not angry, just stating a fact. "You destroyed yourself," Gideon replied. "Maybe, but I'm not going down alone." Pike pulled out a revolver. "If I'm finished, you're finished too." Clara moved, but Pike was faster. He aimed the gun at Gideon's chest. "Don't, either of you." Gideon looked at the gun, then at Pike's face. The mask was completely gone now. All that remained was a desperate man watching his life's work collapse. "What's this going to accomplish?" Gideon asked. "Kill me and you'll hang. The inspectors have all the evidence. My death won't change anything. It'll prove I'm still in control, that I'm not some broken fool who lets a cripple destroy everything I built. I didn't destroy what you built. You did. The moment you decided power was more important than people. Power is all that matters." Pike's hand shook slightly. "Without power, you're nothing. You're just meat waiting to be ground up by someone stronger." "Is that really what you believe?" "It's what I know. The world is predators and prey, Vale. I made myself a predator. You made yourself prey." "No," Gideon said. "I made myself human. There's a difference." For a moment, Pike seemed uncertain. Then his finger tightened on the trigger. The shot cracked through the air, deafening in the small space. But it wasn't Pike who'd fired. He staggered, the gun falling from his hand. Behind him, Sheriff Dawes stood with his own revolver raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "Should have done that years ago," Dawes said quietly. Pike collapsed to his knees, clutching his shoulder where Dawes's bullet had hit. The sheriff moved forward and kicked Pike's gun away. "Harlan Pike, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, fraud, and about a dozen other charges I'll figure out later." Dawes looked at Gideon. "You all right?" Gideon realized he was shaking. "Yeah, I think so." Doc Lindsay appeared in the doorway, drawn by the gunshot. He took one look at the scene and knelt beside Pike, examining the wound. He'll live. Unfortunately for him. Doc glanced up at Dawes. Nice shooting. Been wanting to shoot him for years. Glad I finally had a legitimate reason. They took Pike away in chains. The man who'd controlled Black Hollow for over a decade, reduced to a bleeding prisoner ranting about power and control. People came out of their houses to watch him pass, and nobody looked away this time. The territorial inspectors spent 3 weeks examining Pike's business operations. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. Years of fraud, dozens of victims, structural violations that had put hundreds of people at risk. Pike was charged with enough crimes to ensure he'd spend the rest of his life in prison. His businesses were liquidated, his assets seized. The town slowly began to recover. Clara's fraudulent debts were erased, her seized property returned. Other victims received similar relief. It wasn't perfect justice. Nothing could return the years people had lost to Pike's tyranny, but it was something. As spring began to thaw Black Hollow's frozen streets, Gideon and Clara worked together to rebuild. They combined the laundry business with a repair workshop, using Gideon's engineering skills and Clara's business sense to create something neither could have managed alone. Eleanor Graves faced charges for her complicity in Pike's schemes, but the territorial court showed leniency given her cooperation. She kept her ranch, but lost most of her status. Gideon saw her in town occasionally, and they'd nod to each other, not quite friends, but no longer enemies. One warm May morning, Gideon was working outside the workshop when a familiar wagon pulled up. Tom Bradshaw jumped down, grinning. Mr. Vale, got something for you. He pulled back a tarp to reveal laundry equipment, a proper copper boiler, professional-grade wash tubs, a brand-new wringer mechanism. Where did this come from? Town took up a collection. After everything you and Mrs. Whitmore did, folks wanted to help rebuild. Tom looked embarrassed. It's not charity, it's just... You earned it. Clara emerged from the workshop, saw the equipment, and pressed her hands to her mouth. Tom, this is too much. No, it's not. You two taught us something important, that we don't have to accept the world the way it is. We can change things if we're willing to fight for it. Tom climbed back onto the wagon. My ma says you're both invited to dinner Sunday. She wants to thank you properly. After he left, Clara stood looking at the equipment with tears running down her face. We did it, she said quietly. We actually did it. Yeah, we did. That evening, they sat on the newly rebuilt porch watching the sun set over Black Hollow. The town looked different somehow, less oppressive, more hopeful. Or maybe Gideon just saw it differently now. What are you thinking about? Clara asked. About the day I arrived. How certain I was that my life was over, that I'd never be anything except broken. And now? Now I think being broken is just the beginning of a different kind of strength. He looked at her. Pike was wrong about power. It's not about controlling other people or making them afraid. Real power is refusing to let fear control you. It's choosing to stand up even when the odds are terrible. It's finding people worth fighting for and fighting with everything you have. Clara took his hand. That's a nice philosophy. I learned it from you. You never gave up, even when you had every reason to. Neither did you. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell. Somewhere in town, someone was playing music. Children were laughing. Life was continuing the way it always did after trauma. Slowly, imperfectly, but continuing nonetheless. I was thinking, Clara said eventually, that we should probably make this official. Make what official? Us. This partnership, this whatever we are. She turned to face him. I'm saying I want to marry you, Gideon Vale. If you'll have me. Gideon felt something expand in his chest, joy mixed with disbelief, mixed with the strange certainty that this was right. You want to marry a man in a wheelchair? I want to marry the man who risked everything to stand beside me. The man who saw me as an equal when everyone else saw me as a victim. The man who proved that courage has nothing to do with legs. She smiled. The wheelchair's just the chair. You're the man I want. Then yes, absolutely yes. They married in June beside the creek that ran through Clara's property, with half of Black Hollow in attendance. Doc Lindsay officiated, since the town didn't have a proper minister. Tom Bradshaw was Gideon's best man, tears streaming down his young face the entire ceremony. Even Sheriff Dawes came, looking uncomfortable in a clean suit, but genuinely happy. Eleanor Graves attended too, standing at the back of the crowd. Afterward, she approached Gideon. "I'm glad you found happiness here. After everything I did to you, you gave me a gift," Gideon interrupted. "You showed me what I was made of, what I could survive. I was angry for a long time, but I'm not anymore." Eleanor nodded, something like relief crossing her face. "Thank you for that. And congratulations." As summer deepened, the workshop laundry business thrived. Gideon's reputation spread beyond Black Hollow. The engineer in a wheelchair who could fix anything, who designed better systems than engineers twice his age. Contracts came in from mining camps, from ranches, from towns across the territory. Claire's laundry business expanded too. She hired help, bought more equipment, turned the operation into one of the most successful in the region. They weren't rich. The work was hard, the hours long, the winters still brutal. But they were building something real. A life, a business, a home that was truly theirs. One evening in late August, Gideon rolled up to the crest of the hill overlooking Black Hollow. The town spread out below, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving through streets that no longer felt hostile. He thought about the man he'd been when he arrived, broken, desperate, convinced he was half a person. He thought about Eleanor's words on the train platform. Half a man. She'd meant it as an insult, a dismissal of his worth. But sitting there, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and purple, Gideon realized she'd been wrong in a way she couldn't have understood. He wasn't half a man. He'd never been half a man. His legs didn't work. That was a fact. But his mind worked, his hands worked, his courage worked. His capacity to love and fight and build and refuse to surrender, all of that worked just fine. The world would always judge people by what they lacked instead of what they possessed. It would always try to make broken people feel like their brokenness defined them. But Gideon had learned something crucial in Black Hollow. You get to decide what defines you, not your injuries, not other people's opinions, not the limitations the world tries to impose. You define yourself through the choices you make, the battles you fight, the people you love, the things you refuse to accept. Clara rolled up beside him in her own wheelchair, a temporary measure after she'd twisted her ankle, but she'd insisted on using it to keep him company on the hill climb. They sat together watching the light fade. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how far we've come. About how I almost gave up that first day." "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He turned to her. "Because some part of me knew that giving up would mean Pike won, that Eleanor won, that everyone who ever looked at me and saw only a wheelchair won. And now? Now they see a man who built a business, who saved a child from a burning building, who helped take down a tyrant." Gideon smiled. "They see someone worth respecting, not because I'm inspirational or special or overcame something, but because I did the work, because I refused to disappear just because they wanted me to." Clara leaned against him. "You're definitely inspirational, though, just so you know." "I'm really not." "You are to me." They sat watching the stars emerge one by one, two people who'd been discarded by the world learning to build something better from the pieces that remained. And if there's anything Gideon wanted people to understand from his story, it was this. The world will always tell you who you're supposed to be, what you're allowed to want, how much you're allowed to matter. Most people accept those limitations because fighting them seems impossible. But impossible just means nobody's done it yet. You don't need to be perfect to matter. You don't need to be whole to be worthy. You don't need everyone's approval to deserve respect. You just need to keep moving forward, even when forward is harder than it should be. You need to find people who see your worth and hold on to them. You need to build something, anything, that proves you are here and that your existence meant something. The rest is just other people's opinions, and other people's opinions are only as powerful as you let them be. Gideon had learned that lesson in the hardest way possible, but he'd learned it. And now, sitting beside the woman he loved in a town that had learned to see him as a person rather than a problem, he understood what victory actually looked like. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, it wasn't the life he'd imagined before the mind collapse took his legs. But it was his, built from nothing, fought for every day, earned through sweat and blood and stubborn refusal to be erased. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.